Okay, so we're back and we started actually recording. We have Dr. Saurabh Nizami from University of Queensland hosting this meeting. Thanks, Saurabh, for setting up this Zoom meeting. And so we can start track 4E, and hopefully we'll have other people joining us. So in this track, we're going to talk about the Australian Road Research Board research agenda related to connected autonomous vehicles and also future fuel and future vehicle. So the moderator of the first session is Brittany, but now I just started, Brittany. I can probably hand it over to Robert to start talking about low and zero emission transportation. And just please, a bit of housekeeping, share your questions in the chat box and also keep yourself muted during the presentations. After that, we're going to have a panel discussion, and we can discuss all of the questions posted on the chat box, and also you can unmute yourself for the panel discussion to ask your questions directly. So now I stop sharing, and then I hand it over to Robert.
Yeah, hello. Thank you very much, Elli. So I have prepared a short presentation about low and zero emission vehicles, which I'm about to share. Then, of course, everyone is welcome to ask questions before we proceed to the next session. Just start to share my screen. And possibly my video as well. All
yes,
right.
we can see your screen.
That's good. Let's start from the beginning. Okay, can you all see that?
Yes, we can see that.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm talking a bit about general background, what I've been working on, what we can work on as ARRB, what we have experienced in regards to low and zero emission vehicles or transport. This is a bit of a general overview, which yeah, gives you some ideas about what we need to look at when we talk about low and zero emission vehicles in general. First of all, I want to start with the emissions that are created in Australia from different sectors. And a large part of that is first the transport, which you see in the middle of the brown column, and secondly, the electricity generation and distribution on the left, which is about a third of all of the emissions created in Australia. So these two together have a large, like the emissions and the transport, have a large part, or play a large role in our overall emissions, and this is what we can tackle or look at when we try to reduce emissions in the transport sector. Of course, by using different types of vehicles with cleaner technologies, electric vehicles and hybrid vehicles, and also in relation to that, generating our electricity a bit less carbon intensive than we do at the moment. If you look into greater detail in the transport sector, about 85% of all of these transport emissions are created from road transport. And this is what, of course, ARRB focuses on for most of our work. The rest is rail or vessels, ships, airplanes, and so on. But most of this is created from road transport, from on the vehicles, heavy vehicles and light vehicles we drive. Yeah, in order to reduce these emissions, we can look at low and zero emission vehicles. In this case, I have pull up a figure from the International Energy Agency about the global electric vehicle outlook. And we can see about 10 years ago, 2010, 2011, we had next to no electric vehicles at all. And this has gone in the past 10 years to more than 7 million in 2019 and possibly a lot higher already. Today, there's an exponential increase. Over the years, most of these vehicles are not in Australia, in China, in Europe, in the United States. Partly, of course, because Australia has a very small population compared to the other regions, but also because Australia has not a lot of support for electric vehicle uptake in terms of their policy. So we don't get enough vehicles for sale here in Australia at the moment, which also has contributed to that. Just to note, the BEV is the term for battery electric vehicle. So the vehicles that only drive on electricity and can be recharged from a charging station or power point. And the PHEVs are the plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. So vehicles which have both a battery and a petrol engine usually, and then can drive on either fossil fuels, petrol or electricity. In the next few slides, I want to go into the different options that we can look at in terms of, or that we have to look in terms of energy of emissions reduction. And these are both the use phase of the vehicle, so when we drive the vehicles on the road, but also the phase where we assemble the vehicle, manufacture the parts for the vehicle. That also contributes to the overall life cycle emissions of those vehicles. But before I go to that point, we need to, of course, for the use phase, need to look again at the energy that we use to drive our cars with. And this overview is an overview of the energy or the energy mix for electricity generation in Australia or in different parts of Australia, for example, Victoria or Tasmania, and other regions of the world on the right side here in the gray area. And we can see that all the red columns here are fossil fuels such as coal and oil and gas. And the green parts and the yellow parts are the renewable energy parts. And in Australia in general, overall on average across the country, we have about 80% which is fossil fuels and only 20% which is renewables. In some parts of Australia, for example, Tasmania, there's of course a lot of renewable energies, which means operating electric vehicles in Tasmania is comparatively less carbon intensive compared to other Australian average or even other states such as Victoria. And if you look at other countries in the world, we have a little bit of a similar pattern, although the energy mixes are still a bit less carbon intensive for these areas, as we can see in the next slide. So this doesn't refer too much to the energy mix, so what we produce our electricity with, but this is a summary of the greenhouse gas emissions in terms of CO2 equivalents. And that's where we can see that Australia is, in general, not as good compared to many other regions in the world. Of course, it depends on where you look at. If Victoria has a lot of coal-fired electricity, whereas Australia has a lot of hydropower. And then I want to show what we can use this information for. And this is an overview that shows on the horizontal axis at the bottom here, the grams of CO2 equivalents per kilometer, which means the emissions or the carbon intensity of operating your vehicle if you drive it a kilometer. And on the vertical axis, there's actually two vertical axes here, on left and right. That's the energy consumption of these vehicles. On the left-hand side, you see the energy consumption for electric vehicles, which is given in kilowatt hours of electricity per 100 kilometers. And on the right, there's liters per 100 kilometers for the fossil fuel vehicles. And all the colored lines here represent electric vehicles driven in the different areas of the world, including Australia, USA, for example, that I just showed before. And of course, the cleaner the energy mix is in a certain region or country, the more to the left we go here in terms of emissions intensity for a vehicle you drive. Same for the fossil fuel cars, petrol and diesel. they are further to the right here, and this already indicates that possibly we can save a lot of emissions by driving electric vehicles compared to fossil fuel vehicles. However, we have to look at what vehicles we compare to each other. In this case, I have put two examples in here. One vehicle that is using 20 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers, which is about an average passenger car, and another vehicle which uses 10 liters, 100 kilometers of petrol diesel. And in any of these cases, we can see that the petrol or the electric car helps us to save emissions every kilometer that we drive, depending on how clean the electricity is that we use, compared to the petrol car or diesel car that creates maybe 250, 300 grams per kilometer, or even more than that if you have a higher fuel consumption. But of course, we need to look at what we compare to each other. If that car uses a bit less fuel, then we might get into a point where there's not so much of a difference anymore in some cases. So yeah, this is again a very general overview, but it highlights the potential that we have here in terms of emissions reduction of several hundred grams per kilometers every kilometer we drive. And of course, if you scale it up to many cars, many trucks, many buses on our road network, that becomes a large figure. So that was regarding the use phase when we drive the cars here in Australia. Of course, we also, as I mentioned before, we need to look at when we assemble these cars, manufacture the cars, the components of the cars, because that also contributes to the life cycle emissions of these vehicles. And this is a generic overview of tracking the life cycle greenhouse gas emissions over the use phase of a car. Initially, usually when you compare battery electric vehicles to our current fossil fuel driven vehicles, initially when you manufacture that battery electric vehicle, there is usually a higher amount of emissions generated during manufacturing, mainly because of the new components such as the battery. And over the life cycle of the car, as you use the car and fuel it with or charge it with clean energy, you get out of that negative area here in terms of this benefit in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, and start saving emissions until you get to a point where you cross the zero line and emissions become less eventually after many tens of thousands of kilometers down the road. There's different lines in here for a battery electric vehicle that has a small battery on a 200 kilometer range, or a larger battery, or even a hybrid electric vehicle, which has both a petrol engine and a battery in it. And there's different lines for that. The other thing I should mention here is that if you have a private car, you may reach 50,000 kilometers only after 3 or 4 years of owning this car, which means it takes a very long time for you to offset the initial disbenefit in terms of life cycle greenhouse gas emissions. However, if you have fleet vehicles, such as a taxi here, for example, or other delivery vans, they drive a lot of kilometers every year, and you might reach that 50,000 only after half a year or so, which means it makes a lot of sense to look at, for electric vehicles in general, to look at use cases where we have a high utilization rate of these vehicles, which allow us to really make use of the benefit of the electric vehicle, that it creates less emissions during the use phase. And this is just an image of one of the Tesla battery manufacturing plants in the United States. As you can see, there's a lot of renewable energies on the roof here in terms of solar panels. There's wind turbines on the top right here. This is roughly how it looks like in the United States when Tesla manufactures their batteries. And this is just an indicator that the graph I showed earlier here, where we start in the negative territory in terms of emissions, this is coming further or closer to the zero line in the future as we even use more renewable energies to manufacture our electric vehicles than we used in the past. And also we scale up the production which makes it more efficient and less energy intensive per unit, per car or per battery. Yeah, I think in terms of overview for use phase emissions and vehicle life cycle emissions, that's what I have to share today. I just want to go a little bit into ARRB's work as well, what we have done so far in this space. Just a few examples. For example, we have looked at the decarbonization of the heavy vehicle sector, where you have different options to reduce emissions from using heavy vehicles or even off-road vehicles, as you can see in the agricultural sector, mining sector. And this, of course, includes electric vehicles. You have an electric waste truck up here on the top left. You might have overhead power lines, like a tram for trucks to use on a motorway. You can use it in the agricultural sector, even in the mining sector, where there's a lot of benefits for underground works, where there's no emissions created and a lot less maintenance required, so less costs. We also looked at electric vehicle signage, which you can see here on the right. Currently in Australia, there's no standardized electric vehicle symbol, which can be used on road signs, which means a lot of the different jurisdictions in Australia, they use different symbols at the moment, a car like that, or a charging station, or a car of a different shape. And we were involved in a project to propose standardized signage that can be used across Australia on the signs to avoid future confusion for road users. And another project we were involved in is environmental impact parameter values. It's a bit of a different project looking at costs that result from road transport, from vehicles that we drive on our roads due to the fact that they create emissions, which is here in the greenhouse gas emissions categories. But of course, there's also negative impacts in terms of costs for air pollution, for noise pollution, and for a lot of other things down here that we can quantify, to estimate the actual impact of our road transport and in terms of emissions and costs. Yeah, I think that's it from me. I'm happy to answer questions regarding all of that.
Yes.
And yeah, we can go to the next person.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you. It was very, very interesting for me, even if I'm at ARRB, but ARRB is really big. We have, I don't know, over like 200 staffs and different strategic working groups. So it was even like very informative for myself about what we are doing. There are actually two questions in the chat box from Professor Karl Kochhan, and I can read the questions, but
Sure.
then Karl, just please feel free to unmute yourself and ask your questions directly if you want. But I can start reading the first one. She asked, is the Australian grid more carbon intensive than US and many other developed country grids? Do you have any insight on that?
Yeah, well, that's what I shared at the beginning of my presentation, I think. So on average, according to the data that I could find, or that's from the Australian sources, it is more carbon intensive, and this is what is shown in this slide here. In Australia, we have roughly 0.8 kilograms CO2 equivalents per kilowatt hours of electricity generated. That's the average. Some states are higher than that. Some states are a lot lower than that. And if you look at the average of other countries, we are not as good as them in general. Of course, there might be some variations as we progress. These figures are a few years old already, so Australia might have come down already a little bit. But on average, if you look at globally from the view of developed nations worldwide, Australia has still a very high share of fossil fuels included in the electricity generation in terms of coal, oil, and gas. So we're not as good as the average of the EU, US, for example. Yeah.
It's very interesting. So, for instance, even if we have a battery car, And we think that we are really on a green side, but still, because the electricity, the feedstock for electricity is not 100% renewable, then it
Sure,
means
but
that
even if you look at the relatively dirty energy that we have in Australia, we still are able to save emissions from electric cars. And if you are managing to reduce that in the future, or if you're a private car owner who and plug in your car into your house, which is solar on the roof, then you essentially don't create any emissions at all. It depends very much on the use case that you have.
Yes.
But
yes,
yeah,
thank you.
That's what I can share about that.
Yeah. Also, there's another question from Karl, and she asked, do those greenhouse gas emission savings over time reflect your grid becoming cleaner over time? She believes that US grid estimates are BEVs having half of the lifetime greenhouse gas emissions of the comparable internal combustion engines.
Oh, yeah. It could be that on general in the US they have half the emissions, but I think it depends very much on the parameters that you look at here. It depends very much on the use case that you have. If you look at that figure here, the question is, how long do you use your car for? How much emissions can you save over time? What electricity are you charging your car with? Is it very clean electricity, or is it the average grid? So yeah, you have to have a case study or a case that you apply some figures to in order to see whether this how this looks like in Australia compared to US, for example. But in general, it makes sense to me that an electric vehicle is creates half the emissions of a comparable internal combustion engine vehicle.
Right, but I don't know if that 50% is over time. And of course, the Western grid is very different from the Northeastern and the Texas in the US. But yeah, I'm not sure if that 50% reflects the evolving nature of our grid. Does this plot reflect the predictions of what your feedstocks will be over time?
Oh, no, this is a general graph here. This is a general graph from the from the International Energy Agency. This is not something that is particularly true for Australia. It is just to highlight what to highlight my points that I'm making. But we could, of course, draw a similar graph for a specific use case or area. Yeah.
Yeah, and also it's just for light vehicles, right?
This is for light vehicles.
Yes.
This is for type of vehicle that are shown down here for passenger cars. Yeah.
Very interesting. Is there any more question? Charles has a question. Charles, you can unmute yourself and please ask your question directly.
Hi, Robert. I was going to ask you the question that not many of us have experience with, hybrids or, battery fully electric vehicles, or definitely not hydrogen fuel vehicles. And I wonder whether, the understanding of customers or the users is really important, and how much of an impediment that is, in your opinion.
To what extent we look at the users'
Uptake.
understanding of the different technologies, or what is your question?
The question is that these are all projections, but the biggest projection is a sophisticated user, a customer who understands the real benefits for his or her use.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, the people have to be made aware of the way we are heading towards in the future with all these different kinds of vehicles and emissions reduction. Yeah, but overall, I think to the user, to the average user, what matters most in the end is always the costs, and that's what I've found out so far. And the emissions reduction certainly plays a role, but it's probably not the key decision factor for someone to use electric cars in the future, just because they're less emission intensive, not for the average person. But saying that, we can probably translate this graph here on that slide that I'm showing, which is for life cycle greenhouse gas emission. We could translate that into life cycle costs as well, considering that we start in negative territory in terms of cost, because battery electric vehicles are generally more expensive to buy initially, but then they're very cheap to operate. And at a certain point, you get to a point where your costs become lower than for the comparable internal combustion engine vehicle. So this graph would probably be true for the costs as well.
Thank you.
Thanks. Robert, there's also another question from Kendall, and he asked, did you say that the manufacture of batteries was particularly energy intensive, which is the reason why EVs don't score so well in that part of their life cycle compared to hybrid and conventional petrol vehicles?
So in the past, well, most of the studies that were done in the past, and many, of course, they were done at a time when manufacturing, or the number of battery electric vehicles was very low. And as a result of that, the carbon intensity or the emissions created, because the economies of scale were not there, the emissions created per unit, per battery or per car were relatively high. And some of the studies also used average emissions from average energy grids. So as we move towards a cleaner energy mix in general, and as we move towards something like that is showing here, where we have entire factories that are powered by renewable energies, these emissions per unit or per car come down a lot in the future. So what we are looking here in terms of negative territory at the beginning of the vehicle's life is coming closer towards the zero line in the future, I guess. That's why I think we need to update maybe some of the assumptions that were made in previous studies, previous publications around the manufacturing or emissions of the vehicles.
Kendall, okay, he's happy and he thank you. Okay, so if there's no more question, then well, actually, I forgot to introduce you, Robert.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Do you want to do
yeah,
that?
So,
I can do it myself as well.
Yes, so yeah, let me just introduce Robert after he presented. I'm so sorry, I was just, between the meetings and after that keynote speaker, I was kind of in rush. So yeah, Dr. Robert Kochhan is a qualified engineer and also an economist and the Transport Future Portfolio Leader at Australian Road Research Board. He has extensive knowledge and international experience working on battery electric vehicles and related future transport systems, as you also observed in this presentation. He has previously worked on future urban transportation projects and sustainable mobility solutions in Singapore and Germany. And he has also been involved in solar electric vehicle design and development in the context of the Australian World Solar Challenge, where he participated as a member of a Brisbane-based solar car team. So he's our electric battery champion at Australian Road Research Board. Let's say.
Okay.
Thank you, Robert, for your presentation.
No problems.
So now we can, we can move to another presentation by David Green. David is a senior technology leader within the Mobility Future Group at the Australian Road Research Board. David holds a Bachelor of Engineering and has over 15 years experience in the road and traffic industry, having worked in both public, private, and research sectors. David has a wide variety of experience and knowledge in traffic management. This ranges across standards, methods, technique, and technologies, including ITS, used in the application of traffic management. And David also has experience in network operations planning and movement and place framework principles, road user and transport corridor management, network performance indicators, and other transport corridor performance measurements. And his talk is about road operators' role in supporting the transition to electric vehicles, signal priority using connected. Oh, that's another presentation that is going to have at 2 p.m., I believe, 2:30. Yes. So the first, road operators' role in supporting the transition to electric vehicle. Over to you, David. I just
All
stopped
right,
sharing.
thank you, Elli, and yeah, welcome all. Just try to share my screen. Have you still got your screen? Ah, here we go.
Yeah, I stopped sharing.
Share. Okay.
Yes, we can see that.
No worries. Let me. Okay. Okay, I'll get into it. Yeah, so as Elli mentioned, talking about road operators' role in supporting the transition to electric vehicles. And it was based on a project that ARRB led in collaboration with Movement. The project was an Austroads project, which answered the question of what is needed from road operators to support the transition to electric vehicles, and it resulted in the Austroads published report titled Assessment of Key Road Operator Actions to Support Electric Vehicles, and that report is published and freely available by the Austroads website. And yeah, we thank Austroads for the opportunity to work on the project, and also Movement for the involvement in this project as well. So you can get a link to the Austroads report by the link shown on the slide there. Just need to register with Austroads to download the report. Yeah, so the project, I guess, at first acknowledged that for society to transition to EVs requires inputs from various stakeholders, including the vehicle manufacturing industry. So they need to build and supply the EVs. The government departments and agencies, so they need to remove the barriers for the uptake of EVs and implement policy to support EV uptake. Then there's vehicle users and general society, so they need to purchase and operate the EVs. And then there's the road operators, which was the focus of this report. And so as EVs are used on their roads, they need to support the transition to the project, or transition to the EVs. So the role of the road operators were the focus of the investigation. Therefore, the project was really based on assessing and defining the road operators' role in supporting the transition to EVs. So we used the term road operators to reflect road and transport agencies. However, we acknowledge that it may also refer to local government and also private road operators, which may operate toll roads, etc. So, as I mentioned, encourage you to download the report from Austroads or contact ARRB if you have any, I guess, interest or want some further details. So, following on from what Robert mentioned about electric vehicles, so the project first categorised what an electric vehicle was. So it's essentially battery electric vehicles, or there's three groups. So first one's been battery electric vehicles. So those vehicles propelled by one or more electric motors with batteries that require recharging from external electricity sources. Then there's the plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. So that's a vehicle propelled by one or more electric motors and batteries capable of being externally recharged and supported by an internal combustion engine. And there's the fuel cell electric vehicle. So that's a vehicle propelled by one or more electric motors powered by electricity that is generated on board a hydrogen fuel cell that combines oxygen from the air with the hydrogen to produce electricity. So just I guess a side note, and so I guess it's noted that hybrid vehicles, so with no plug-in features, are excluded from the study. And then there's also noted that the definition of EVs is an evolving space. So in the recent UK ban on internal combustion engines to come into effect by 2035, this would also include the PHEVs, so the plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. So in that instance, EVs are those vehicles which are purely EVs only and do not have an internal combustion engine at all. But yeah, for our project, we kind of recognised those three as being the EVs. So as a high-level overview, the project found that in order to support the transition to EVs, there would be actions that span across road operators' core and their non-core functions. So the core function relates to an area that road operators currently manage or are responsible for, and which require different actions for EVs than for conventional vehicles. And then a non-core function relates to an area that the road operator may not need to, but could act on to support the transition to EVs, either by removing barriers or providing active support. and based on stakeholder expectations, other road operator examples, or taking a leadership position. So road operators, as road operators undertake more actions associated with the non-core functions to support the transition to EVs, this is expected to increase the support in EVs as shown, and then this could result in an increasing uptake of EVs in the community. Yeah, so essentially through the investigation, 11 core issues were identified. So these are issues that, as mentioned, road operators must address in order to support the transition to EVs. And so that is because EVs are different to internal combustion engine vehicles and will have an impact on how the road operators manage their road networks. So of those 11 core issues, so 4 were associated with registration and licensing. So this includes inconsistencies in the classifications of EVs, considering expanding NEVDES, which is an Australian concept for registering EVs across the Australian network. So that's to capture EV data. Consider unique identifier for electric and hydrogen vehicles, and then investigate any license and mass concession for light electric trucks. And then 2 are associated with road access. So that include assessing hydrogen vehicle safety and access, and investigating payload concessions of electric heavy vehicles. And then 5 were associated with EV charging infrastructure. So this does not include the deployment of EV charger infrastructure, so that comes under the non-core ones, but essentially include review charging infrastructure, public interactions, consider plugless charging and how that might evolve and impact on road management, reviewing service station standards, review signage standards and guidelines for EV chargers, and then consider sharing EV charger data to help plan for EV charger deployments, and then also having a bit of an understanding of how much it's been used out on the road network. So the report then identified 25 actions associated with these 11 core issues. Obviously, I'm not going to go through all of them now, but yeah, I encourage you to download the report to have a look at them in more detail if it's of interest. And then there was 11 non-core issues were identified. So these are issues that road operators should consider addressing if they wish to take a proactive role in supporting the transition to EVs. So of the 11 non-core issues, 2 were associated with education. So these include coordination of EV information, resources and tools, and supporting trials and sharing results. 3 were associated with governance. So that include clarifying the role of road operators, coordinating multi-agency approach, and addressing EV noise as at a low speed issue. And then 6 were associated with the EV charging infrastructure deployments. They include EV charging investment and requirements, standards and guidelines for charging infrastructure, planning for EV and hydrogen networks, heavy vehicle EV charging requirements, standardising EV charger payments, and then EV charger parking and queuing, helping to plan for that. And so likewise with these issues, 27 actions were associated with them. So yeah, full details are in the report. So overall, the report came up with the recommendations around all of that. So the first one was essentially implement the actions associated with the road operator core functions. So these are the actions that align with road operator core functions and therefore will be impacted by the continued uptake of EVs. Consider implementing the actions associated with the road operator non-core functions, consistent with the role of the road operator wants to take in supporting the transition to the uptake of EVs along a spectrum of being reactive or proactive leadership. So yeah, it's essentially the non-core ones are really depending on how much of a role the road operator wants to take in leading and being proactive in supporting the transition to EVs. Then develop an electric vehicle charging systems guidance documents for Australia and New Zealand, as obviously this report was written in that context. And then for Australia road operators, consider how best to coordinate with the National Electric Vehicle Strategy, or NEVS, currently being developed by the Australian Federal Government at the time, and complement the work of the Transport and Infrastructure Council's Low and Zero Emissions Vehicle Working Group. So that may have progressed since the report was written, but that was the recommendation at the time. And then as those recommendations were developed through the Austroads investigation, they are tailored really to Australian and New Zealand road operators who are members of Austroads. However, other international road operators could keep a watching brief and apply any learnings locally, and likewise for Australia and New Zealand road operators could learn from international developments. So I guess there is a bit of a role for ARRB in assisting road operators and then others in this space. As highlighted by Robert before, there's already a fair bit of we have done a bit of work in helping in that space, in addition to the report that I just mentioned now. But I guess some of the other areas that we can help in is in terms of helping with understanding EVs and how they fit in and differ from the broader vehicle mix, and helping with shaping policy around their use and education campaigns to help demystify their features. So that probably follows on from what Charles was mentioning before about developing helping the customer be more aware of it, help develop policies and strategies to further encourage EV uptake and deliver a more sustainable and resilient road transport network, review any, I guess, safety implications around EVs, help with design on plugless in-road charging systems, so help trying to progress that potential element and feature along, and then help develop strategies to maintain EV charging infrastructure, and also look at mass concession exemptions as a result of an increase in the EV heavy vehicle mass. I'm sure there's other aspects that we can help with, but they're some of the key ones that immediately come to mind. Yeah, so that's essentially the end of my presentation today on this topic. Happy to take any questions or move on to the next one. Thanks.
Thank you, David. Is there any question? I don't see any question in the chat box. But yeah, like from what you presented, definitely it's very useful for the next presentation, which is actually mine, and it's about hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. And I believe that we can adopt the same kind of strategy for the next one.
No worries.
Okay. Okay. Kendall has a question. Is plug-in charging likely to be viable?
Is it likely to be viable, or plugless charging, are you saying?
Oh, yes, plugless. Sorry.
Well, I guess it's probably too early to tell. Yeah, but I think it's definitely got I guess a potential there to kind of help address some of those issues associated with EV and the need to charge, plug in, find a charging point. But yeah, obviously, it's going to be that issue around having that installed in the road and having it, answering that question about it being viable, etc. So yeah, I think it's really just early days, and that's what we highlighted in that report. It's something that has been talked about, but it's really only at its infancy. So it's from the report's perspective, the recommendation was just to keep a bit of an eye, keep a bit of a watch on how those things develop, and and see how it goes. But yeah, I think that viability question is a valid one indeed. So yeah.
Yes, particularly I think in terms of heavy vehicle use cases, it looks like that it might be viable, right? Because of the recharging time, so on and so forth. So for instance, there are some trials in Europe, I think, I believe in Sweden, right? That there's a dedicated lane, charging lane for heavy vehicles, so that when they're traveling, then they get charged.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so there's trials going on. Yeah, and so I guess how viable that is for wider scale deployment across the road network, I guess, it's time will tell. But yeah, it's definitely one of those ones that it looks good. But yeah, obviously, yeah, there's a lot of, I guess, a lot of questions to be answered around how to actually deploy that at a wider scale across a road network.
Okay. Okay, there's another. Yeah, second. Thanks. So now we can move to other presentation. Let me share my screen. Oh, actually, I shared my screen already. Sorry. So you can see now my screen, right?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, let me just sorry. I have too many slide decks. Actually, I can't see my. Okay, yep, here you go. Now I can see that. So I'm going to talk about hydrogen fuel cell heavy vehicle, and it's not any project like externally funded, but that's the research that we started studying it here at ARRB since last year that I joined ARRB, and it's one of the research agendas now at Australian Road Research Board that I'm going to talk about it. So it's more about like the literature review, but also our recommendation for some of the project opportunities that might be emerging. Okay, so hydrogen drive, hydrogen as a fuel. Yes, hydrogen can be used as a fuel in transport, where fuel cell vehicle convert the hydrogen stored in cylinders that you can see here in the vehicle to electricity, the oxygen here in the fuel cell tank from the air, and then the produced electricity is then used to drive an electric motor here in this picture, and then is then used to drive, recharge the electric battery. So hydrogen has different so-called colors based on its feedstock or the source of it. We have gray hydrogen, blue, as well as green hydrogen. So gray hydrogen is produced from coal, blue hydrogen is produced from gas, and green hydrogen is generated using electricity produced by renewable energies such as wind turbines or solar systems. And when green electricity is used in hydrogen production, then we can say that's 100% zero emission. It has been said in the literature that hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles are 30% more fuel efficient than internal combustion engine vehicles, and have the added benefit of recovering energy when braking or driving downhill, which to some extent compensate for the higher cost of the fuel. But why FCV? So some argue that now that we have battery electric vehicles, and hydrogen is more like a distraction. Battery electric vehicles also exist as an option, yes, in competition kind of with fuel cell vehicles. However, battery electric vehicles have limited operational capability in terms of heavy vehicles, including a lower distance range traveled and much higher recharging time, excessive size and weight of the battery, which actually reduces the payload efficiency, and also a higher material footprint due to the use of lithium batteries. Well, we know that in terms of like heavy vehicles, particularly trucks, idling time is a very critical decision. It's a very critical factor. So for recharging a truck that may take like 7 or 8 hours, it might not be very ideal. And also the distance range with one time of charging. So the estimations indicates that refueling time of a heavy-duty fuel cell vehicle is about 3 to 8 minutes for regional delivery and 10 to 20 minutes for long-haul trips. It is based on the Department of Energy in USA study that they did in 2019. Whereas recharging time for the same size battery electric vehicle is estimated to be 8 hours, which requires idling the truck and allocating a designated charging area. So estimations also show that the net additional weight of a battery electric tractor trailer type is typically around 1,200 kilograms. And due to the weight of the battery pack, electric engine, inverter, and gearbox, and all of it. So it is believed that FCV is a preferred option for long-range, heavy-duty vehicles. However, the debate between the battery versus hydrogen misses the obvious solution that why not both? Everyone knows that the importance of fuel diversification and particularly like in Australia, also we have some limitations in terms of the capacity of our grid for electric, like buses or electric vehicles, heavy vehicles. EVs are efficient and cost-effective for lighter vehicles traveling relatively short distances. But when we go to higher distance of travel or weight and the power required, then it really increases the battery size and weight, and in addition also, yeah, as I said, it takes recharging time. So that's where the fuel cell heavy vehicle application could be useful. The viability of hydrogen trucks has been already tested and established in a number of international markets. You can see here's a few ports. They're leading the hydrogen trials, and also a few truck trials. Actually, there are heaps of them out there in China, Japan, and also Europe. I have just mentioned a few of them. However, it is yet to take hold in Australia. We don't have any hydrogen trial in heavy vehicles. We have recently heard some news that there are going to be 2 hydrogen fuel cell trucks in Port Brittany, Port Canberra in New South Wales, and also 1 hydrogen bus in Perth for one of the mining companies, but we don't have any like living testbed or any trial yet in Australia. So globally, the hydrogen economy is forecast to reach 155 billion in 2022. And many countries are investing in this technology's future potential as a fuel, energy store, and feedstock. In Australia, also CSIRO estimates a potential for a $1.7 billion export industry and significant growth in domestic end user demand market by 2030. And the use of hydrogen as a fuel in transportation has been evolving over the last 20 years, and it's just emerging, as I mentioned, in China. Oh, actually, I mentioned China twice. Yeah, the International Energy Agency already suggests that hydrogen will be cost competitive in the transport sector in the next 5 to 10 years. And in this graph here, which is sourced from CSIRO National Hydrogen Roadmap, this study estimates that hydrogen could be commercially competitive with alternative fuels and infrastructure barriers that you can see here in the blue box. It will be removed in the next 5 to 10 years, as shown here. Regarding its forecast, some of the assumptions relate to the status quo and may have been validated through some in-field trials, with some of these trials now reaching a commercial reality with growing demand. But in Australia, however, these assumptions are yet to be tested, which impedes the freight transport industry in taking on the risk of investment of transitioning their fleet towards a hydrogen truck. Here again, I mentioned, I actually put another figure from McKinsey Center for Future Mobility. And this report was published in August last year, and it suggests that the cost of hydrogen at the pump falls to a competitive level with the cost of diesel in the next 5 to 10 years, and hydrogen fuel cell trucks are expected to become cost competitive compared with the diesel trucks in before 2030. Hydrogen costs reduce with scale, and the estimate indicates that a 50% drop in hydrogen fuel cost delivered at the pump will be equivalent to diesel price. So the reduction comes actually from the lower cost of hydrogen production, 30%, and 70% from the lower cost of retail distribution, driven by increasing station size and utilization. So as the heavy-duty fuel cell vehicles reach the market, then the freight transport industry needs information on the benefits, challenges, risk, and cost of ownership of these vehicles. Currently, these decisions must be made with little long-term field test history. There are just a few trials, as I mentioned, but not in Australia. And in general, also fuel cell vehicles lack significant historical operational, maintenance, and cost data that would typically support investment decisions in transitioning the fleets. So there exists actually a few unanswered questions and concerns regarding heavy vehicle fuel cell vehicles as effective. For instance, what would be the effective distance range, reliability, fuel stability, and so on and so forth. And then I mentioned that about the reduction in the price, hydrogen refueling infrastructure is the key enabler of this technology, but it's just like a chicken and egg problem. So how we can actually unlock decarbonization of heavy vehicle is actually it's an interconnection between supply and demand. The uptake of heavy-duty fuel cell vehicles is facilitated by easy access to the infrastructure and affordability of hydrogen fuel at the pump, where diesel and gasoline powered heavy vehicles take advantage in place from the in-place fueling infrastructure. The lack of infrastructure on hydrogen might be a barrier. So for instance, in Queensland, current hydrogen production occurs at industrial site where gas or so-called like blue hydrogen or electricity or so-called green hydrogen is used. Regarding a network of hydrogen refueling stations on the public road network, hydrogen either should be transported via trailer in a compressed or liquid form or via existing gas pipeline. Actually, one of the advantages of hydrogen is that we can utilize the skills and also the existing pipeline, gas pipeline to transport the hydrogen, and even the existing gas pump stations. But we have to mention that transportation of bulk compressed or liquid hydrogen on public roads needs regulatory reforms pursued by public and private road operators. That again, we don't have it here in Australia. The other viable option is the production of hydrogen at the refueling station by on-site electrolyzers. Because of low demand, now there is not too many investments in that area. There is also another option of mobile or removable refueling infrastructure that has been recently introduced into the market in Japan. However, yeah, in terms of like technical and safety conditions, requirements, permits, they all need to be developed, tested, standardized, and harmonized across different countries. Because when we are talking about fuel cell heavy vehicles, then we are talking about like OEMs manufacturing with the same standards. So it's important to have a harmonized standards, which actually still doesn't exist. Yeah, notably regarding like hydrogen refueling stations, it has been advised by several like organizations, for instance, European Commission or like Australian Trucking Association, that the public financial support should be used to trigger significant private investments for these refueling stations. And here you can see the capital cost and based on the capacity of these refueling stations based on different trials that has been in place around the world. So yeah, when I mentioned about unlocking decarbonization of the heavy vehicle transport sector, you know, like in terms of like light vehicles, passenger cars, it's very easy to talk, and it's very like with the policies and everything, because the market and the model availabilities exist, then is really easy to move towards that decarbonization by the targets. But when we are talking about heavy vehicle sector, is we don't have any electric truck. I mean, there are some electric truck trials, but it's not very common. So where the size and dimension of demand are unclear due to the a lack of economies of scale and scope, then the supply price of fleets and hydrogen fuel also will be much higher than diesel trucks. And on the other hand, also the demand for hydrogen in the transport and logistics industry is overwhelmed by the lack of infrastructure, lack of calibrated total cost of ownership within the local context, for instance, here in Australia and in so many other countries, and also the higher price of hydrogen fuel on the supply side. So left unmanaged this, then the technology upheaval may even bring more discouragement for the industry. There's so many questions that haven't been answered here, for instance, in Australia, and that's what we are pushing so hard since last year in Australian Road Research Board. Hopefully, we're going to have some externally funded and publicly funded projects that we can explain and we can answer these questions that I have listed here. For instance, in terms of what sector the hydrogen could be financially viable. Is it agriculture sector? Is it first last mile logistics, or is it mining? Because they all have different operational requirements, and then it has to be tested if, for instance, that in terms of the temperature of the hydrogen, because we know that fuel cell vehicles, they also produce heat. So it really depends on even the region that these use cases should be tested. And we should understand that what are the main industry concerns and barriers. Where does the heavy vehicle industry see an investment opportunity, and what are the business model and procurement stages of a heavy duty fuel cell vehicle project, and some other questions that actually impact the ownership of hydrogen fuel cell trucks, for instance, effective distance travel, or in terms of the maintenance cost or insurance cost. And And also another question about how much is hydrogen fuel currently depleted during each shift, and how long does charging time take for each class of heavy vehicles. When we are talking about heavy vehicle application, then the requirement is, for instance, here in Australia, in Queensland, the requirement for a round trip is about like 900 kilometers of travel by at least like just 2 times of refueling. And also in terms of the cost, in terms of the power and the load of the vehicle, we are talking here about like 45 tons of load for this application. And we believe that to answer these questions, the first step would be a proof of concept demonstration project, or a kind of a living test bed, so that we can create a right environment in which all of the innovative solutions, they just come along, they test, and then we roll out the direct involvement of the freight transport operator and energy actors. And that's where here Australian Road Research Board can help, because we have that national research role, and also with the engagement that we have with the industry, and also an independent voice, it would be useful to provide a recommendation on this technology, which is actually very new. With that, actually, I can, I finished. So please contact me. Here's my email address, and I'm happy to take any question.
So Elli, I raised my hand, my little virtual hand. So I hear from my friends in the energy sector that really the only way for the foreseeable future to get hydrogen is to use curtailed or spilled or excess renewables. Otherwise, it's just way too expensive and it's not carbon saving. So is that how you think Australia will be doing it?
Yes, that's correct. We believe that kind of a transition should happen, so that even there's some, for instance, even like some gas resources that we have. So we don't think that we necessarily should now encourage everyone to necessarily use green hydrogen as a feedstock, because of the price, as you mentioned, it's not cost competitive. But if we just wait and see if it's going to be cost competitive in the next 5 or 10 years, then we will lose that race for decarbonizing the heavy vehicle industry. So even it might be even good to start with a blue hydrogen, or like even gray hydrogen, and then move towards blue hydrogen and then green, whereas just waiting and do nothing, because at the moment the heavy vehicle sector is just dominated by diesel trucks.
Right, but luckily Tesla's building that e-truck, and I think others are too. So we're seeing, for certain applications, like you said, deliveries and stuff, Rivian vans, these kinds of things. And I think Australia was thinking about having a dual drivetrain on your truck, so that they would get rid of the diesel when they were inside the cities, but when they went long distance, they could rely on petroleum.
That's correct. Yes, actually, a startup here in Queensland, I know that they're even testing having a fuel cell on the trailer itself, not just a prime mover, which is going to be very interesting. But also in Australia, we are lucky that we have too many renewable energy sources like wind and solar, for instance, here in Queensland, that, there's just the problem here is that our politicians are now very focused just on export market, whereas they just miss that, creating that local demand market, and it won't be viable. The export market won't be viable unless we have a local market. And the first and the best use case for the local market of hydrogen would be heavy vehicle sector. so like we've seen lots of investments in hydrogen hub creation in Queensland, in Gladstone, in several places, and they're just focused on generating the hydrogen from renewable energy and then just exporting it to Japan, South Korea, and China. Whereas I think that we need to start thinking about creating that demand, local demand for hydrogen here as well.
Thank you.
Thanks. Hi Ross, how are you? Long time no see. Okay, I see I see a question here. Perhaps remote mining sites could provide a green hydrogen ecosystem to test the concept. I think Fortescue might be looking into this in Western Australia. That's right, Ross. Yes, Fortescue have recently purchased the Horizon bus, fuel cell bus, and I think 2 of them, yes, for transporting their staffs to the mine site. Is something that, yeah, hopefully, I believe there's an opportunity there that some mining companies to kind of showcase that they're moving towards green future, then they might invest in some of these areas.
So if you have time, I don't understand how a mining operation could produce green hydrogen. Could you, is it coming out of the ground naturally? Like, what is that?
Yes, so Karl, it looks like that actually, okay, so hydrogen can be produced from different processes. Even like when you're even producing steel, then you might actually be able to produce hydrogen out of it. Yeah, it can be produced from even like waste and from yeah, different processes. So some of and coal as well, as I mentioned. So I believe that Fortescue, I'm not sure. Yeah, actually, I'm not sure actually they're gonna use the green hydrogen feedstock for that, or some of the unused. Ross, do you know more about the feedstock for the hydrogen of their trial? You can unmute yourself.
Yeah, look, I think it's going to be through solar panels. So you use on-site solar, quite a large amount of batteries, storage as a potential as well. So I guess the real critical issue is the amount of water. So there's a couple of aspects from that, but it's probably not just for your buses, but for your large-scale mining equipment. Because of the remoteness, it's quite expensive to get diesel there anyway. So if you generate it on site, you can basically sort of cut that element out of the supply chain. So I guess it's a future way off. Really good sort of PR work, but again, something that we could get on board with in terms of the research task.
Yes, thank you. Okay, any more questions? Hi, we have Dickson here. Hi, Dickson. Well, actually, Dickson was the hydrogen champion at Australian Road Research Board. And then I just followed his lead. Dickson, we just presented, I think you joined us a bit late. So we presented some of the preliminary research that we did at Australian Road Research Board with regards to the hydrogen application for heavy vehicles. Would you like to add anything?
No, just jump in. I got a bit of time during my lunch break, so that's all good.
Sorry for putting you on the spot.
That's all right. That's right. I'm just yeah, wish there's been a lot of activities, I guess in the industry, with a lot of companies looking at introducing, you know, the freight movement with hydrogen, etc. Especially in the US, there's been a lot of movement, which will basically equates to a movement here in Australia as well. So looking forward to that.
Okay. Kendall, yeah, so you have a question. Is handling water an issue with hydrogen as a fuel? Well, most of the hydrogen hub productions here in Australia, they're launched very close to ocean or to the water source. Water should be desalinated to be used in the electrolyzers. But then I would say transporting the hydrogen might be a bit challenging, an issue, not particularly handling the water. Although actually, yeah, it depends. If you're talking about like the mine site, the discussion that we had previously, you're right. And also the amount of water to be used to produce the hydrogen, it might be a challenge. But again, the advances in technology, I mean, I remember when I was watching, I don't exactly remember what was the documentary, like I think 10 years ago, about electric vehicles and in terms of the speed and the torque that they can handle. And now with the new Tesla model, and as Karl mentioned, even like the Tesla trucks, you can see that how fast this technology travels. So I assume that with all of those challenges and issues and high price of hydrogen production, again, it's going to be resolved if, in short future, if we focus on that. Okay, so if there's no more question, I believe that's the last presentation in this session, and we're gonna come back at 2 p.m. again to talk about connected and autonomous vehicle research. Or alternatively, we can continue to the next session. Is there any recommendation, or would you like to take a break for 20 minutes and then come back at 2 p.m.? Okay, so it looks like that's the plan. So let's just have a break for half an hour and then, yeah, come back at 2 p.m. See you shortly.
Thanks, Elli.
Thanks, Britt.
Thanks, Elli.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks.
last session, Elli?
Yes. Yeah, it's almost 2 p.m. and yeah, we can start it, right?
Do you also do the Western region sessions, or no, just the
I
East?
tuned in.
Yeah.
No, I just tuned in. I do the management and the organization, but not the moderating, hopefully, because it starts at 1 a.m. at night.
Yeah, and for
Yeah.
Kara to be on, it's I think it's about 10 at night her time, so it'd be a long day, isn't it?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. I think Kara, I don't think that she can join us now, but I shared all of the recordings from the yesterday's session with her and also with the other organizers. We have to edit it and then we will upload it on YouTube.
Okay.
We have a channel, Bridging Transport Researcher. Then also you can find the archive of the previous years as well. But yeah, this round we're gonna share the recording with everyone. Last year also we did with the registrants, but yeah, this year also I'm gonna post it on LinkedIn, social media, everywhere. Okay, so now that's 2 p.m. and then Charles, let me introduce you because you're the next speaker.
Thanks, Elli.
Okay, so we have Dr. Charles Karl, who is currently Mobility Future Technical Lead at the Australian Road Research Board. He has a background in ITS, network operations, telematic, and CABs. With over 35 years experience, his current interests are in supporting the foundational work for the next generation transport systems to safely operate in Australia. Charles is a member of ISO TC204 and standards at Australia IT 023 on ITS. He is a chair of the Scientific Reference Group of ADVI, which is the Australian and New Zealand Driverless Vehicle Initiative. And also he is an associate investigator in an NHMRC study led by the George Institute into harnessing the benefits of automated vehicles for health. And he's going to talk about safety evaluation framework and key issues in CAS going forward. Over to you, Charles. I stop sharing now so that you can share your screen.
Thanks, Elli.
Yes, we can see your screen now.
Well, hello, good afternoon, everyone. It's the second last session. I'm very happy to be here to present. And in the earlier session this afternoon, we had 3 speakers who talked about, I'm at the wrong slide, I'm sorry. We had 3 earlier speakers who spoke about low and zero emissions and EVs and hydrogen cells and fuel cell vehicles and so forth. I think the one thing we know is that transport in the next 20 or 30 years will be very different. And the other thing that we know as well is that we can see it with our very eyes. If we look at EVs that coming into our market, if we look at Uber, if we look at e-scooters and micro-mobility and mobility as a service, and it's not and, it's but we really don't know how all of that is going to work together on our network safely. And the work that ARRB is doing, especially in mobility futures, is, I guess, to investigate how all of this can work together in planning, in future operations, in the context of, I guess, the best interests of all of our communities in Australia, not just people who live in the cities, but also in regional towns and remote areas. How is all of this going to work together. And I suppose that is the context in my presentation. And I'm also, I think I feel very privileged because as I get to the end of my career, many of you are starting or in the middle of your career. And it's really exciting times. It's really exciting times because as you can see from the figure I put up, although that figure is, you know, Beijing, sorry, it's Beijing. It actually happened in all our cities, all across the world, in India, in Malaysia, in Singapore, in Iran, not just in Manhattan or London or whatever. And around that, sometimes when we talk about electric vehicles, I feel it's more like in that picture on the left, that I'm only used to the horse and carriage, and somebody says, you know, we need the internal combustion engine and it will have petrol. And I'm thinking, you know, where's that infrastructure and things like that? So we don't have the answers, but I think, you know, if we go back to our profession, our engineering, and what we have done, I think we are the people who can understand best how to prepare our networks for the future. And in this first presentation, so I managed to combine two presentations. The first one, of course, is how is all of this going to operate safely? Because until we transition to, you know, cars with no steering wheels and so on, right? We are going to have an environment where we will have the horse and carriage still in some of our cities, and we will have, you know, all the normal cars that, you know, people will drive, the young people, the old people, and we will have all of these wonderful, you know, e-scooters, e-bikes, and autonomous shuttles and so forth. So how is all of that going to work safely? Now, this sort of timeline that I mapped, in fact, I think we are in that period now because we have a very prescriptive regulatory and operational environment. Remember, all of you have got a driving license. And then if you buy a car, your car, you know, you got to pay registration and then your car can go on the road. Otherwise, you will be fined and the car will be towed away. So we have driver's licensing and you register your car. And then wherever you drive, even if you drive on a university campus, you have to follow the rules in the campus or on a local street or on the motorway and so on and so forth. So it's very prescriptive. But when we talk about cars with no steering wheels and so on, autonomy and so on, right? We are transitioning. And if you think of those operations today, how do they manage to operate? Well, you know, the proponent goes to the road agencies or the government and say, hey, minister, can you give me an exemption? And do you think the minister will just say yes based on that? No, he wants to see a lot of information and so forth. And then he will have his people study the case and say, okay, if you follow all of those things that you say you will do, then I will let you operate on my university campus or on my high street or on my motorways. So this talk is about actually what is behind all of that, because we need to understand it, because when we go into the future, these exemptions and so forth will actually need to be formalized in some sense, you see. But I think the most important point is that we are moving to an ecosystem where we where we have a very prescriptive way of managing our networks, to an ecosystem of, you know, the Tesla or the Google or the cruise automation or the Peloton operating on our networks. The most important thing to remember is that, you know, we can have vehicles coming from all over the world, but in order for it to work in our country, in our jurisdiction, right, it depends very much on the sort of infrastructure we have. Like we talked about hydrogen vehicles and electric vehicles. No infrastructure, how can you operate? It talks about, you know, the other part is about people. People need to understand how to work with the technology and the infrastructure, not just the owners of those vehicles, but all the other network users, right? The pedestrians, the cyclists, the trucks and the cars and the buses. And the fourth part of the system is our regulation and our operational frameworks. You know, you can think of laws like you can see so many different laws for lockdowns and COVID, but to actually operate them successfully, we can see that there's a lot of non-compliance, and not only that, people with language difficulties don't understand and cannot do those things, you see. So those are really, you know, you can come up with laws, but if you don't have those operational frameworks in place, it doesn't work. The best laws cannot work, you see. So when we talk about a transport system, those four elements really have to work together. And what works in another country, obviously, we can import 80%, but the remaining 20% is where we need to customize it for, you know, local people, local environments. Now, you all know that transport is different. We used to have silos like what you can see on the left. And much like our telecommunications, where before we had copper wire and a digital pipe, now we have a digital pipe that can carry voice and data and videos and so on, you see. And in transport, I guess when we look at our land pipes, now that pipe can carry all sorts of journeys, all sorts of trips. And if we can't operate differently. So the regulatory environment is trying to play catch up, and all of us from every jurisdiction understands our operational environments are really stressed because we don't know how to accommodate those e-scooters and e-bikes and drones and autonomous shuttles to go around our roundabouts, to go around our intersections. They are really stressed, you see, because we haven't really figured out how all of that works. And the best way to explain what I've just said is that conceptually, we know how you know, an automated vehicle or electric vehicle works, you see. And we can have that vehicle in the physical infrastructure as a vehicle operating on the road, but the logical elements are really what are lacking in our in our architecture. And that is similar to saying, you know, I've got the horse and carriage and I know how to operate it on my roads, but now the motor car comes along and I really haven't figured out, you know, where the petrol stations are going to be, where am I going to park the car, and how is this car going to, you know, do this or that with the horses and carriages. We haven't worked it out yet. We are beginning to, in the exemptions that I guess jurisdictions are providing, but we are on that journey. Okay. Now, I like to use this example from Singapore because if you look at the boxes that I have not colored, those are the things that come from the vendors and the vehicle. So the vehicle comes in with a system safety, an active system safety, and a safety of the intended function. So SOTIF, those are ISO standards, and the vehicle and the vendor has tested them out, you see. But the thing that they haven't done is basically validating that in the local environment, be it George Street in Sydney or Burke Street in Melbourne or any other road in your jurisdiction. So of course it works on the test track. It works in the countries where those manufacturers originate from. But will it work in our environments? We don't know, you see. And the other circle that I drew around was in Singapore. Our colleagues in Singapore said, will it work in the Singapore environment, you see? And where will it work in Singapore? So those are the things really that ARRB is interested in, and all of us would be interested in, because I guess we are not manufacturing vehicles in Australia. But in order for those vehicles to work, for us to benefit from safety, from productivity, from you know, emissions and so on, we need to be ready. And my last couple of slides in this presentation is so why have a safety management plan? It's because what we are trying to do is different from what we already have on the network. So we really have to think for this combination of technology and infrastructure and systems, right? How is this going to work, you see? And so the organizations develop their idea about how it's going to work safely, and they present it to the jurisdictions, and the jurisdictions approve. So what does this mean? What does this look like? And this is my final slide. So we have done many of these in Australia in order to get and stand up trials and demonstrations and so on. And it basically at the higher level, I'll just go through it at the higher level, talks about the project, talks about the technology, talks about how the safety will be addressed, what sort of traffic management plan will be in place. You know, traffic management meaning we are going to close the road down and no one else is going to travel on the road. So it's going to be very safe, Mr. Minister, we can operate it. Or, you know, we are going to operate it in peak flow traffic. And how are we going to do that? Oh, well, we're going to have an escort. We're going to tell all the drivers, we're going to drop the speeds. Will that happen? And incident management. And then there are other approvals, of course, from and compliance, insurances, and so forth. And then all sort of other information about who is actually going to be the driver and so on. So these elements at a very high level for your understanding comprise the sort of suite of documents that have been prepared and will be prepared. And if you look into the future, then the Google system, the Waymo system will be very different from the Uber system, which will be very different from the Volvo system, or very different from the 1-3 cab system. So rather than having that environment that I mentioned before, where here are the road rules, you can register your car and you have a driver's license, all of these systems will be operating. So you can start to think about how is this all going to work. Elli, I'll just continue and go into my next one.
Yes, please.
So what are the key issues? What are the key issues really that need to be addressed? I guess I've just put them down here. So rather than go through it and then tell you these are the key issues, I put this first. I said, what are the key issues? Okay, who is in control of the automated vehicle? Because if something were to happen, or if that vehicle is speeding and the police pull up that vehicle, then who is he, the policeman, who is he going to fine? You know, so who is in control of this vehicle? And as I said before, who assures in-service safety? So imagine the vehicle comes into Australia and the Australian government says, okay, you can use this vehicle in Australia. It's met our design rules. And then it appears in Queensland or New South Wales. So from the time the vehicle hits the road, from the port or from the factory and goes out onto the road, right? When it is in autonomous mode, and something happens, who is the person responsible? Because the driver will say, no, it's not me, you see. How are we going to manage traffic if this vehicle is autonomous? How is the vehicle going to read our signs? Or, you know, if there's an incident and then there's a police car there with the lights flashing, will that vehicle know what to do? Does the system understand all of that? And if we believe in connectivity, how can we share that data, right? And I suppose the big question that I put down in red is, you know, the future network. Everyone's talking about mobility as a service, and we are now talking, it's going to be integrated. What really is the network that we are managing? What is the scope of it? Is it just the roads? Remember, I talked about the pipeline, and in the early days, we were talking about managing the copper line, and then, you know, you can bid for digital spectrum, and then you put in, you know, fiber and so on. The regulation is on the fiber. The regulation is on that network, that land network that can support pedestrians moving on the pavements, on the curbs, on the roads, cars, and so on and so forth. You see, light rail, heavy rail, bus transit lanes and so forth. I suggest to you that if most of us come from a road traffic transport domain, that it is no longer road traffic that we are looking at managing. We are looking at managing the whole network. And the demand that presents itself is the community waking up in the morning and wanting to go to work, wanting to send their children to school, wanting to go on holidays, wanting to go to meetings. That is the demand that we are managing. And the supply that we have are the transportation modes that exist in our communities and the vehicles that exist in it. So it's that integrated mode that we are looking at, not just looking at that piece of roadway. I don't want to go into every one of this work, but we have been quite involved at ARRB since 2015, from light shuttles to light vehicles to heavy vehicles. And in those boxes there are many projects looking at physical infrastructure for automated vehicles, cloud connectivity, what the future environment is going to be, FCV vehicles, probe vehicles, which will be presented. And we've also used the safety framework for army, agriculture, mining, construction, because bear in mind, these are all land domains, and those vehicles that operate for army, for agriculture, for mining, for construction, come across our public network as well at some points in time, you see. And can you imagine if we had different standards for different, I mean, it's just going to be complex, and I'm beginning to see more of this realization across jurisdictions around the world. So you might ask, what are the roles and responsibilities? Charles is presenting something that's really complex, but I've put this figure in to try to make it really simple. Because if you look at this figure, and at the bottom where I say users and journeys, that's ourselves. And if we go to Uber, then that's that service provider in the center of the figure. Now, the Uber system will offer us a whole range of cars, from economy to prestige, and that's transport services. So there's many different cars. The Uber system will also say, do you want to pay tolls or do you want a low-cost ride? So, we can choose the infrastructure. And the Uber system will sometimes also say, hey, Charles, what about if I take you to the train station and then, the train will arrive in 1 or 2 minutes, and then the train can take you to the CBD, and that's probably the cheapest option, but you just pay for the Uber ride to the train station. So there are transport infrastructure providers, road and rail, light rail, and so on and so forth, you see. And then on the right-hand side, of course, there's ownership. Who owns what, you see? And then, of course, who is managing all the supply? You stop here and you can't park here, and so on and so forth, you see. So there are system managers, there are regulators, and that colorful center is where I see all the mass service providers living. Okay, we will continue to have more and more of them. And those lines that I have drawn, right, because of the smartphone, because of connectivity, then the user really benefits, because in close to real time, users like ourselves can benefit from a large variety of options to get from A to B based on how much it's going to cost, based on time, and based on, I guess, the urgency of the trip. So this is what mass really is all about, and we are benefiting from that environment. Now, remember earlier I talked about the logical infrastructure, and when David presented in the earlier session, he talked about road operations, the things that road operators should be concerned about when we have electric vehicles on the network. And he talked about some of the core functions, some of the core areas that road operators should be concerned about. This is something similar. If you operate the network and you are going to this future environment, what are the core areas that you need to be concerned about and have ready so that you can support these multiple service providers with multiple vehicle options, with multiple infrastructure options? And they are, of course, surprise, surprise, standards, interoperability, security, safety assessment, precise positioning, communications, the digitization of our traffic regulations, real-time management, and last but not least, of course, an assurance, a safety assurance regulator. Just like in aviation, you can operate all sorts of aircraft, but there is an assurance agency. So I guess I close my presentation by saying, what areas do we have under development, and what are the things that are the missing links. So with who's in control in Australia, we talk about an entity that is being created in law called the Automated Driving System Entity. In Australia, we've also prepared regulatory impact statements for a safety assurance agency. So this would be the safety assurance agency that would assess all of those safety cases in a consistent way nationally, so that once it's approved, subject to state-by-state provisions, then you could have that service provider operate across our jurisdictions. We also have a fair bit of work and a new task force established on looking at the data from these vehicles and the data to be transmitted. The three that I put in red deal with the concept of operations. So this is the part where I talked about how are we all going to interoperate together. And really, to do that, if you imagine the horse and carriage again, and the car starting to appear, and then that middle picture with lots of bicycles and buses, you can only do so much thinking about it at home and drawing on your piece of paper. A lot of it is actually learning by doing. We actually have to have those, others have called them proof of concepts or sandpits or trials going, so that the whole community can go up and we can learn how to fine tune so that we can operate with all those different modes. I think number 6 is the most important one. 6 years ago, when I attended a conference on autonomous vehicles in the US, that time it was quite new. Somebody asked the question, how many of you, there were about 500 of us in the audience, have ever traveled in an autonomous vehicle? And out of 500 so-called experts, only a few people put up their hand. And so for this uptake to happen, even now, I suppose, if there was a conference and we were all present, 500 or 1,000 of us in Australia or in Singapore, and if I were to ask the audience, how many of you have traveled in a highly automated vehicle? I don't think there would be many hands that would go up, maybe 10%, 15%. And if that is the experts, how can you go out into the community and ask them, questions and preferences and so on, you see? And not only that, how are they going to behave when these vehicles present themselves? Because it's all imaginary. Okay. So the idea of integrated transport coordination, the idea of how we are going to deal with humans and so on is still a work in progress. And I congratulate and am quite envious of all you younger people who will be involved in further work in this area over the next number of generations. Thank you very much. That is my presentation.
Wow, thank you, Charles. That was very, very insightful. In fact, the integration of the systems that you mentioned, like you put the user in the center of everything, and then all of those services then they're gathered to provide the service, different services to that user, instead of the current system that we have all of those silos of transport modes, whereas actually user is just kind of user just a user in fact to use those transport modes, and there's no integration, there's no optimization around the user as the center.
No, that's right. I guess all of us wear a number of hats. We are users, we are travelers when we go from home to work or wherever. So we often have that lens, I guess, but the lens that I've been presenting is a lens where we are trying to manage a system where there are, X million trips a day in each of our capital cities, you see. And so if you look at it from a supply demand point of view, because I'm just not talking about, how I manage my four-arm intersection, I'm talking about the whole transport network, you see. And it hit me once because there was the Director General of the Greater Jakarta Transportation Agency came to visit ARRB, and he said, Charles, in Jakarta, we are doing about 80% on PT, and we want to increase that a bit more by another 5%, you see. And he asked me, what are we doing in Melbourne? I was scratching my head, you see, because if you are responsible for all of the trips in Greater Jakarta, right, do you look at cars or buses or trains? You are looking at getting people to where they want to go with all of the supply that you have in the network, you see. And this really is what integrated mobility is about. And I don't think anyone on the call today can say that we can't do it without the technology that we have. Because, with smartphones and Google and all those sorts of things, right, we know it is achievable, technology-wise. But in terms of a concept of operation in our individual cities, I think we've got years to go, you see, but we need to make that start. And having that overview or global view then means that whatever projects that we are doing, right, can fit into that puzzle, you see, because we are putting the jigsaw pieces or those little building blocks in place to get to that future vision, to I guess to ensure that that future vision will happen in our communities, on our networks.
Yes. So I believe that the regulatory aspect of it is the most challenging one, right? So because, for instance, now we have, for instance, TMR or Brisbane City Council, all of those, local councils and state road agencies as the road operators, whereas when we are transitioning towards that service, then we're going to have service managers instead of road operators, or in terms of public transport operators. So I believe that, the interorganizational transition, it would be one of the biggest challenges.
Yes. So Elli, you raised an interesting question, because I guess who has the knowledge of all the trips that are going to happen in the next 15-minute time window? Certainly not the jurisdiction, but if Google was used by everyone, I would say Google would have a good idea about the demand for trips in the next 15-minute time window, you see, right? So, I mean, if they can make money, they will. And so there is obviously a lot of private sector interest, because once you know the demand, then you can fulfill those trips, you see. And not only do they know the demand for the trips, they know the price point, the customer preference. That is mobility as a service. And I think that is going to happen all over the world. But what does that mean for the regulators? What does that mean for the system manager? I mean, if I were government, I'd say that's good. If this can deliver what the community wants, good. but I have to manage, right, safety. I have to manage supply, you see. So this understanding and our way of thinking in how we manage our networks will need to change. Otherwise, right, the optimization will benefit certain parts of the community, but not others.
Yes, the liability of those services and for the government, I think also is one of the challenges. Since we have a very small group here, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question directly.
Yeah, hello. Thanks, Charles and Elli. I was wondering, Charles, what level of autonomous driving is already legal or possible in Australia? I mean, there is a lot of car manufacturers that, including Tesla, of course, that have a quite high level of automation already. Are these cars just brought into Australia and then driven as they are driven in US as well? Or are there certain features turned off that are not legal, not possible in Australia? To what extent do we have of autonomous driving already in terms of that?
I think at they call it highly automated driving. So there is a gray area between level 2 and level 3. So the definition of level 3 is the fallback is the driver. So what that means is that in a level 3 system, if suddenly there's a system failure, the system can't compute, then it'll say, oh, I can't do it, pass back to the driver. And the transition period is, depending on who you talk to, could be in the seconds, maybe 5 to 10 to 15 seconds. When you go to level 4, you still have a steering wheel, but the transition period could be 5 minutes to 10 minutes to 30 minutes to 1 hour. But so that means that if you can imagine a line haul truck and the driver's fast asleep in the cab, at the back, and then the truck is coming to a small town, and it has to be manually driven through that town, obviously. So 20 minutes before it arrives, is waking up the driver. Hey, you got to get up, got to go and take over control. And driver gets up, and then he goes, and then he sits there. And if he doesn't take control, then there's a safe side, a minimum risk condition where the truck will then pull over to the side of the road and stop until he gets up. So that's level 4. So the transition is, depending on how you design systems, and vendors design different systems, could be 10 minutes, 30 minutes. But level 3 is the one where, if you read all the reports, it's basically a few seconds. And that is the problem, you see. And it happens now with level. So that is why you're seeing some of the crashes that are happening, because drivers get lulled into a sense of security. So from a government point of view, the level 3 systems are not approved, you see. So in other words, right now it is black and white. If you are driving a car, you are responsible. You have the primary safety responsibility, Robert. So if you fall asleep and there's an accident, or you use that autonomous system that can go up to level 3, and you whatever, you do something with it, you are still in control as far as the government is concerned. But in the future, when the vendors start to market level 3 systems in Australia, then the entity, which is what I said, the automated driving system entity, is the one who is going to be liable if there's an accident, you see. And the question for countries all over the world is, who is this entity going to be in Australia, you see, right? Yeah. Hasn't been worked out yet.
Yeah, thanks.
I believe that NTC, National Transport Commission, is now developing a regulatory framework for ADSE, but yet still I'm not sure how much applicable it would be. I mean, practical. Oh, yeah.
Yes. So if I may add, so that's why when you have a car, right, and if your tires are bald and your headlights don't work, right, and your windscreen wipers don't work, and you get into an accident, right, who is the responsibility? So if you have an autonomous car and your sensor doesn't work, right, and the windscreen is dirty or whatever, and it doesn't see, and who is the person who's responsible for that? All of that hasn't been fully worked out yet.
Right. Thank you, Charles. So now we can move to the other presenter, who is Brittany Croft. You can see my screen, right? Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. So let me introduce Brittany Croft. Brittany is a senior transport engineer at the Australian Road Research Board. Brittany graduated from Queensland University of Technology in 2017 with a double degree in mechanical engineering with honors degree and business, majoring in marketing. While studying, she was also a product specialist at Tesla. Brittany has been at ARRB for 3 years, working across the organization as the executive manager of the iSafe vehicle in the CEO office, as data collection project manager, and now in the mobility future team as an expert in autonomous and electric vehicles. And with that introduction, then I stop sharing and I hand it over to Brittany to talk about ARRB's CAV Pro vehicle.
Thank you. Let me just share. Can you all see this?
Yes.
Is this the last session? Just.
Oh, no, actually, there are 2 more presentations. So I'm going to talk afterwards. I'm going to talk about the physical infrastructure and also CAV uptake demand forecast. And David Green is going to talk about cloud connected transport system and also a signal priority, trams signal priority project.
Okay, I was just wondering. Okay, my presentation is pretty short, so it probably won't go over time. So this is basically just a very high level overview of the project that probably most of you know about because most of you are from ARRB. But anyway, it doesn't hurt to go over it again. So the official name for the car is called iScan, and I'll go into what that means just in a little bit. So the presentation outline, first we'll go through the project scope, then the phases, the objectives, and then we'll finish off with just a brief kind of overview of what we're looking to do in terms of the technology that we're going to fit to the vehicle. So iScan stands for Intelligent Survey Collection for Automation. There's also a nickname that we're kind of using for the car, which is Lola, but that probably won't appear on any official documents. The vehicle is a Volvo XC90 Recharge, so it is a plug-in hybrid. And if you're wondering, that's where it plugs into. The vehicle currently doesn't actually look like this. This is kind of the mock-up for when we do get it wrapped. But when it actually gets this wrap on it, it will have extra technology already fitted to it, so it'll look a bit different. The overall aim, I've tried to make it sort of as basic as possible. So basically it's to integrate additional hardware and software to the vehicle's existing system for the purpose of 1, data collection, and 2, for level 3+ driving. So Charles already touched on this briefly, but for those of you that don't know, these are the SAE levels. Again, very brief. All of this stuff you can go into way more detail. So a lot of cars now on the road, like a lot of older cars have no automation, like kind of, that would be probably like a vintage car. Many cars now have level 1 or 2. So say the Volvo that we have without any additional equipment on it is probably around level 2, kind of nudging into level 3. As Charles said, it's kind of a grey area between there. Just because the Volvo has a system called Pilot Assist. So that has, say, like adaptive cruise control, lane departure warning, parking, 360 camera, all that sort of stuff. So when we fit our extra technology to it, we're hoping to officially be in the level 3, and then eventually work up to level 4 and maybe level 5, but that's still a bit far away for everyone at this stage. So this is an iMove project, and these are the official 5 stages for at least the first year of the project. Obviously, it's a vehicle, it's an asset, so we will continue developing it beyond the first year. But yeah, basically, we're going to start with project conception. That's already happened. Vehicle research and assessment. We actually just submitted the paper for this, actually just about 20 minutes ago. Then we're going to fit the software and hardware. We're going to test the vehicle and then write a final report on the findings of these stages. And this is a timeline of just how it's expected to go. So currently we're around here, I'd say, month 3 and 4. So we're starting to look at what technology we want and what software, what hardware we want to actually fit to the vehicle. And then we'll begin probably the hardest task of actually installing it and making sure it all works. This is kind of 3 stages. Again, I'm trying to make everything very sort of basic to understand. So while the 5 stages before that was on the official, like that's on paper, that's the 5 official stages of the first year. This is kind of like the project phases for the entire life of the car. So starting with actually installing the extra technology all the way up to actually making it work to increase the car's automation. So once we've decided on the software and the hardware, we're going to obviously install it into the car and make sure it integrates with the car system and with each other. Then after that, we've obviously got to test. Because all of the equipment we're installing obviously collects data, we're hoping that the data that it collects, we can then, say, get commercial survey work and provide that data to clients, say, like local governments, yeah, kind of adding on to the fleet of survey vehicles that ARRB already has. And then through doing all this testing, collecting all this data, we can then use that to increase the automation of the vehicle to get it to that level 3 and beyond. So the objective is to, this is the official one, establish a new automated probe vehicle as a test bed to enable applied research by ARRB into the deployment of cabs in Australia by identifying different gaps. So yeah, there's quite a few gaps already that we've identified. As you can see on the right-hand side, I won't read them all out. But yeah, through this, through all the data that we'll collect and just actually having a proper cab running around and that ARRB has access to, we're hoping that we can find out not only what the gaps in the actual cab, like in the actual vehicle market itself and the vehicle itself, but also the infrastructure. That's going to be an important thing because, as we know, say a lot of the vehicles currently that are on the market with some form of automation level 1, 2, whatever, they're made overseas. Australia is quite different. So we've just got to make sure that our infrastructure allows us to actually access some of the, I guess, higher technology that the overseas cars have that, yeah, sometimes we miss out on because our infrastructure is a little different. This is kind of like just an overview of the technology we're going into. We don't want to we haven't exactly decided yet, so we don't want to kind of, I guess, jump to any conclusions, but this is kind of the essential things that you would need. So LiDAR, radar, GPS and cameras. There will probably be multiple of these, so we won't just have, say, one radar, one LiDAR. There'll be multiple units installed around the vehicle. And then, of course, to integrate all this hardware together, we'll have some form of software or middleware, as well as a computer on board to tie it all together. And I'm sure you all know what a LiDAR is, but this is, yeah, just an example of, say, especially like on the right, how we can use the LiDAR data to basically act as eyes for the vehicle. And just finish the presentation with some more shots of what it would look like. So the finished product should look pretty much like this, but just with some added unit, like, you know, gadgets, things on the side, LiDAR, radar, cameras, that sort of thing. So it'll be a bit chunkier, but hopefully look very similar to this.
Thank you, Brittany. Thank you for a very nice presentation. Yes, in fact, you're very lucky to have an A team here. Brittany, Francis, the initiative actually started with by Dickson and Leow, who unfortunately left ARRB to start another exciting career. But anyhow, the project, I hope that we keep going. And in fact, we were cautious about not leaving too much information because that's an iMove project, and we are cautious that it has to be first announced by iMove and ARRB, and it's actually an internally funded project. So we don't have an industry partner for this project. The industry partner also is ARRB, but with the help of iMove. And also, I think it is worth mentioning that this CAF prop vehicle is going to be the first vehicle which will be assembled here in Australia. All of the existing level 4 vehicles in Australia, they have been assembled overseas by OEMs and not by the research organization themselves. So now, actually, it's one of the objectives of this project, that how we're gonna fit all of these sensors and to talk to each other, to sync, and then talk to the software, and then talk to the vehicles, so that we can we're kind of we're doing very similar thing that OEMs perhaps are doing, but with more challenging tasks, because we don't still have access to the CAN bus of the Volvo of the vehicle. So perhaps we need to do some reverse engineering or more research into that. And yeah, that's going to be a very exciting project. So Brittany, Francis, myself, we are the point of contact for this project. In this call, we don't have too many attendees, but I believe that once we share the recording with the Western registrants of this conference and on social media, then yeah, feel free to reach out and ask you a question with regards to this project if you have. Thank you, Brittany. Okay, so the next presentation is me actually. Let me just share my screen. Please let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, we can see it.
Yes. Okay, so I'm going to talk about CAF uptake demand and infrastructure enablers of CAF. Well, actually, I'm going to present some research that we've done at ARRB in different projects, but also most recently in one of the Australia's project, minimum physical infrastructure requirements to support the operation of CAFs in Australia and New Zealand. That's an ongoing Australia's project, and I believe that's going to be published around like October, November. Unfortunately, we can't present the final results of that project yet, but I'm going to just talk about the literature review that we did for this. So, I mean, before starting that, following what I mentioned about the Australia's project, just please watch out closely for that report, because in that report, we looked at the uptake demand of CAFs in the first phase. Then we made some forecasts for different transport tasks that I'm going to present a part of those results here. Then we looked at what would be the physical infrastructure requirements for different level of automation. And then we did the economic analysis of different investment options. And then we prioritized the investment advice for the road agencies. And yeah, that's kind of a very interesting project, but unfortunately, as I mentioned, I can't present the results until it is publicly announced and published. Okay, so when the first question is, when do cabs arrive? There are uncertainties around cabs. The multi-dimensional aspects of the interactions between cabs and also infrastructure contribute to these uncertainties. And it actually makes us to limit ourselves to talk about the plausible futures, because we can certainly say that they will arrive at 2025 or 2030, because there are different levels of automation, as it was mentioned in the previous presentations, level 2 to 5, and we've seen that there's no distinct separation between these levels. We are kind of, we have some vehicles that they're level 2/3, so it looks like that is more hybrid version of these levels. And then each of them definitely need different requirements in terms of the safety, as Charles mentioned, and in terms of the regulations, as well as the infrastructure requirements. That's why that there are some uncertainties how actually they can operate and how they can penetrate to the fleet market in Australia and New Zealand. And so proportion of automated technologies and also the extent of connectedness and interaction with infrastructure, other vehicle and vulnerable road users. So we are talking about like digital connectivity, where there will be 5G or CITS available for, oops, sorry, everywhere. So that's actually contributes to the uncertainty. Now, with in the figure on the right hand side, you can see that I have indicated probable, possible, and plausible future. So the forecast that we did for the uptake demand is more on plausible future because of all of these uncertainties. So here in this slide, you can see a timeline of expected AV deployment dates that we sourced from the literature review and also with the direct communications with OEMs. Looking at the OEM roadmaps serves actually two purposes. First, to present the future of automated driving through the lens of the technological readiness, and second, to show the significant uncertainty around the arrival time in the mass market, because I'm going to actually present the previous prediction by the OEMs. We just see that how they just keep postponing their timeline. But for instance, actually in the, oh, sorry, I'm just, yeah. So here in this roadmap, you can see that actually we looked at different announcements that OEMs made, and it looks like that automated vehicles were still not commercially available by 2020, and some major manufacturers such as Tesla, Honda, and BMW are looking to make significant progress in this year, followed by other players from next year onwards. So if this timeline were to perfectly predict the future, then it can be assumed that highly automated vehicles are unlikely to become widespread for private use until after 2024. And in terms of robotaxis, we can see some of these industries here that they have made some progress. For instance, Waymo drivers, ride-hailing services. Now, actually, they were deployed in October last year, and there will be also other, like for instance, Amazon, Zoox, and Walmart, that they have announced that their first driverless services will be rolled out in later this year. However, as I mentioned, past experience with target dates set by OEMs have demonstrated that these dates are predictions at best and are constantly revised or even abandoned by their proponents. A number of reasons were cited in the literature or in the media to explain this ongoing change in expectation, including reprioritization of investment and adjustments to accommodate the COVID-19 pandemic and future business models and so on and so forth. But yeah, still it is very uncertain. In this figure, actually, I put a prediction that was made by Automotive Research in 2021. And yeah, you can see the extent of time lapses in targets because they look at the previous announcement. So for instance, if you look at Tesla, they mentioned that the target of releasing full self-driving vehicle was in 2018, whereas actually it was postponed to the end of this year, 2021. This figure also we presented the evidence-based forecast of new passenger vehicle sales, including the sale forecast of EVs in Australia. Here you can see that were adopted actually from Irannezhad report in 2018. And the reason that I also mapped the electric vehicle uptake rate here was the common notion that there would be interconnection between electric vehicles and connected autonomous vehicles. Here actually I have included the forecast at UK by Connected Place Catapult that was published earlier this year, and the sale percentage of highly automated passenger cars in Canada reported by Victoria Transport Policy Institute. Interestingly, when we look at the forecast in 5 years ago, they appear to be way more optimistic. Looking at the trajectory of uptake demand forecast in the last 5 years, it appears that these predictions are constantly again being updated and postponed to a later date. For instance, the Catapult study in 2017, they announced and they predicted that under high uptake scenario, all 100% of all 100% of new fleet sales in the UK will be highly automated in 2035. Whereas actually in 2020, you can see this figure drop to 69% of all new vehicles. And so, yeah, if you consider the Gartner hype cycle, it looks like that we are now in this illusionment period of AVs, where it is likely that in the next 5 to 10 years, it will reach out to the plateau of productivity. We also here looked at the willingness to adopt CAVs. So here I have presented the ADV ARRB public opinion survey. ADV is the Australian New Zealand driverless vehicle initiative, the trademark, the ARRB's trademark. And they run a public opinion survey every year, started from 2016 to this year. So undertaken by ARRB and ADV, this annual survey represents one of the largest and the most recent research efforts dedicated for understanding the Australia's community's attitudes towards the adoption of CAS, trust and acceptance of CAS. The survey was undertaken over multiple waves, as I mentioned, and with a sample size of over 5,000 respondents in Australia and New Zealand. And it's a very long survey containing 75 questions, and the data that generated from the survey, particularly from the second wave in 2017, and also the following years indicated a variation in the level of acceptance by demographic characteristics such as gender, age, residential location, and so on. Oops, sorry, I just Yes, so yeah, apologies for this gap here. So this diagram here presents the resources that were used to inform our forecast scenarios. Model availability was drawn from OEM roadmap, as I mentioned earlier in this slide. Uptake of ADAS and market penetration trend also was borrowed from the Future Vehicle 2030 study done by Austroads. And the influence of electrification on the uptake of AVs was also taken into account. And we utilized the consultation inputs to estimate the deployment of AVs on different operational design domains, different roads, and also different road agencies. Also different regions. At this project, we also focused on strategic advice on on infrastructure requirements and also its economic feasibility over an extended time horizon that UQ Catapult study provided. And we adopted actually the low and high scenarios of new vehicle sales of AVs in UK and Europe from this study, with an adjustment of 4 years of time lag in vehicle availability. And the reason behind that time lag, 4 years of time lag, was actually turned out from our consultation. And there were a few reasons for that, particularly the left-hand side driving, and it is believed that the manufacturers now they're just focused on the right-hand side driving cars, automated cars, and also some of the other preferences in Australia. For instance, we have a very higher preference for SUVs like Toyota Hilux and that kind of vehicles, which are expected that to be automated way later than the other models. So our uptake scenario development, we assumed an S-curve pattern in the vehicle sales trend, and we assumed low scenario, medium scenario, as well as high scenario, and I already explained about a 4-year time lag. So the low scenario is representative of a slower trend of advancements in AV technologies. And the high scenario is more optimistic and it is more representative about rapid advancements in AVs. And the medium scenario is the moderate technology development, so kind of like a midpoint forecast between low and high scenarios. So here I actually presented the annual sales of all vehicle sales with regards to the connected autonomous passenger vehicles. And here you can see that the high and low scenario may be a bit aggressive, meaning high is more optimistic and low is more pessimistic. The medium scenario is arguably more reasonable, and it could be considered as a plausible forecast. In this way, when we actually we have both low and high scenario, then we can undertake sensitivity tests. For example, if the uptake were very rapid, accelerated by electrification or interventions or a breakthrough in sensing technology, then we will be able to see that what would it mean for different like investment infrastructure requirements. So the market expansion in terms of a new vehicle sale is expected to continue significantly from 2030 onwards. And the medium scenario here, you can see that it assumes that passenger vehicles and robot taxis equipped with advanced driver support systems, like level 1 and level 2, have already hit the market. By 2027, about 98% of new passenger car sales will be capable of level 2 automated operations. As the highly automated fleet enters the market, then the share of human operated cars would reduce, and it will reach like 50% of all new sales in 2046. And the other half of new sales then will be capable of level 3 plus operation. So the medium scenario suggests that 60% of new passengers cars will be capable of high automation by 2050. This figure again presents the plausible timeline of the market penetration of passenger vehicles. So in the previous slide was the new sales, whereas this one is the market penetration. And we forecast the market penetration based upon the new fleet sale rates that are presented in the previous slide, the annual market growth, which is a constant rate per capita based on ABS, Australian Bureau of Statistics forecast of low, natural, and high population growth, and an average lifetime of 10 years of passenger vehicles. This figure also presents the plausible timeline of commercial deployment of AVs in various operational design domains. So here you can see that we have separation across regional roads, regional highways, urban roads of territories, for instance, Tasmania or Northern Territory, and urban roads of capital cities, motorways, and urban highways. And based on the analysis of supporting evidence gathered from the expert consultation, the Austroads reports, and historical motor vehicle sales, we expect that wide-scale availability of driver support systems, or so-called ADAS, level 1 and level 2, will occur sometime between 2025 and 2035. And the deployment of highly automated vehicles, level 3 plus, with a dominant share of level 4 vehicles, will occur between 2035 and 2050. So that's about the AV uptake demand. I'm going to talk about infrastructure enablers, but I can answer to some of the questions if you have. Yeah, I don't see any question in the chat box. Please feel free to unmute yourself if you have a question. Otherwise, I'll just keep going. So now I'm going to talk about the infrastructure enablers. Okay, so it is important to consider the differences between the operation of camera-based or vision-based AVs, whereas compared to map-based AVs, which leads actually to different infrastructure requirements. So we've seen that OEMs have contradictory views regarding connectivity and also high definition maps, and the underlying reason is actually their approach to automation. In terms of, for instance, connectivity, some AV developers, such as Waymo and Mobileye, they claim that their level 4 AV will not require connectivity to function. On the other hand, connectivity is mentioned as a key element of some other OEMs, such as General Motors, which collects road agency information on planned road works and then transmits that to the vehicles using commercial mobile data services. So yeah, for instance, Tesla's strategy is based on the notion that if an AV needs a map, AV map or high definition map, then it means that its camera and sensors are not capable of driving without it. Hence, if you talk to Tesla company, then they're strongly resisting the idea of high definition maps because they promote naturalistic driving, mainly like image based in their automated vehicles, and do not use localization using LiDAR points, which you can see in the actual right hand side, the high definition maps, which is used by Waymo and General Motors. So the argument behind this strategy is that like high definition maps create, like if you talk to Tesla, their argument is that because high definition maps create a virtual reality, which is static, whereas reality itself is dynamic, and high definition maps are not useful unless the vehicle is in a car park or doesn't have any single signal coverage. It is unclear, however, if a high level of Tesla's automated product would still not require any AV map, right? On the other hand, for instance, Mobileye relies on AV maps that are harvested through the IQ technology embedded in around like 65 million vehicles equipped with ADAS. Some other OEMs have also their own macro AV map or a high definition map to help better navigate the precision. There might be differences in infrastructure requirements between these two approaches to automation. And for a study by iMove and QT identified that both camera and LiDAR-based localization solutions independently work very well, but not perfectly. And to get actually closer to satisfactory performance, then a combination of both is likely to be needed, which is an interesting actually result. So there's a potential need to develop communication channels or forums to facilitate the discussion with OEMs and road agencies that what actually they require from the infrastructure. This slide is about the AV readiness survey that was undertaken by ARRB in 2019. Anthony Germanchev was the project manager of this project, and ARRB conducted a road audit of the following attributes like line marking, speed sign, cellular connectivity, temporary conditions, discontinuities in the route and lanes, and line marking. And the approach consisted of 3 processing methods: machine vision post-processing of road surveys, manual rating of road surveys as like validation, and also real-time processing to simulate cab operation. So they audited 25,000 kilometers using network survey vehicles that you can see on the left-hand side using existing and new video imagery. And also an additional 1,000 kilometers of priority roads using real-time data collection method. So the finding actually has been published in the Abstract report, Infrastructure Changes to Support Automated Vehicles on Rural and Metropolitan Highways and Freeways, and it is publicly available for everyone to download and to read. The major findings, I won't go through all of those here, but it looks like that in Australia, freeways and highways typically are ready at least 90% of the time for the operation of at least level 2 automation. And cellular availability also is typically high, and also it looks like that width of the line marking is likely to be less important than the overall contrast between the line and pavement. This result actually is very interesting because there are some other studies that they just they focused on the line marking width, and they say that it should be certainly 150 millimeters, whereas actually it looks like that the contrast ratio is far more important from the machine vision. And yes, so with that, then that study actually really helped us in understanding that what would be the physical infrastructure requirements for CAFs. In short term, we see that AV readable line marking and a harmonized approach of road signage, and also work zone signages and treating ghost line marking. There are important infrastructure requirements for the operation of cabs on all road types. For motorways and highways, ramp line marking is confusing for the automated vehicles. It is a finding of several trial and several studies, and also the placement of the ramp and also mainline signage is sometimes confusing for the automated driving, and they mistakenly read the sign installed on the ramp, not on the main line, or the other way around. On urban arterial roads, we need to invest in CAF compatible traffic signals in terms of the placement, and also in terms of the, again, AV readability of the traffic lights. When I say CAF compatible, it means that having roadside units and connectivity to vehicles, because the trailers, one after one, they show that when the placement of the traffic lights are blocked by other vehicle or by trees or something else, then it would be a very risky situation for automated cars. And also school zone signages, that they have different standards across different states, and it's one of the other critical issues. In the rural highways, however, because in Australia we have too many unsealed outback roads and rural highways, and it looks like that it's impossible to have the pavement line marking, the pavement actually in the first place, let alone line marking or edge line marking on those. And in that case, then providing the contrast ratio of the road surface would be important for AVs. And these are actually the short-term infrastructure that would be required. In the short/medium term, then we see that some of the new infrastructure would be required. For instance, safe stopping areas in the motorway and highways, and transitional points, managing the transitional points between like highways and arterial roads. We have now some abrupt transitions that is very challenging. So for the automated driving technologies, there should be connectivity, or should be proper signage installed on those transitional areas. And on urban arterial roads, we're gonna need CAF pickup and delivery areas for robotaxis, for robo shuttles, and also for the robo-commercial vehicles. And curb and walkway management for footpath delivery vehicles is also another challenging areas that has been found out by several trials. In the medium term, then we might need to look into AV-specific bridge designs, AV-specific pavement designs. And the bridge design, what I mean is, because of the platooning, it hasn't been in the traditionally in the design of our bridges, we haven't looked into the impact of platooning of vehicles with a low gap interval between them. And also in terms of the pavement, because if the AVs operate the same trajectory in terms of the lateral positioning within the lane, then it's going to be one of the other challenges. Although we have seen from some of AV developers that they're introducing some stochastic distributions for the lane keep assistance system, so that there will be a bit of distribution rather than traveling on the same trajectory. And also in the bridge design, as I mentioned, the platooning, also we've seen that the new sensors, it enables a longer leader-follower model. So we may actually not need to do any improvement in that aspect. In the urban arterial roads, we may need semi-transit dedicated lanes, and intentionally actually excluded the dedicated lane for passenger AV vehicles, because based on the consultations and based on our observations in ARRB, it looks like that even OEMs are not in favor of that, and it has lots of equity issues. However, it could be one of the areas for transit dedicated lanes. For instance, now we have BTR bus rapid transit, BRT lanes, and now it could be shared with the transit or semi-transit dedicated lanes. And in long term, then there might be new infrastructure required, for instance, teleoperation facilities for level 3 vehicles. We've seen that like Uber, if they introduce, or Waymo, if they introduce their level 3 robotaxis, then we may need teleoperation facilities. However, we believe that it would be private enterprises that would manage and would invest in such facilities. And in motorway and highways, then we're gonna also need some dedicated lanes for freight, for heavy vehicles. In terms of the safety, I think it's gonna be very scary for the other vehicles to see an automated truck, 25 tons of truck just traveling without any driver. But again, maybe in the beginning, it would be just dynamic, time-based in night operation, and just dedicated on some of the key routes of freight, for instance, from the port to industrial areas. And some new infrastructure that is foreseen to be required on urban arterial roads is going to be AV remote parking facilities and AV mobility hubs, because if we don't have any driver, then it is believed that the car ownership would shift towards more using ride sharing and AV ride sharing rather than owning an automated vehicle. So we have now 4 classes, and actually I put these boxes because there's actually separation between them. If you look at the first column here, these are the existing infrastructures that would benefit both human drivers as well as automated driving. So the benefit actually would be for the whole population. The second column are in fact new infrastructures that again would benefit both systems. And third column would be updating or upgrading the existing infrastructure that would benefit only automated vehicles. And the last column would be the new infrastructure that again would just benefit the automated vehicles. So I have just 2 slides in terms of the high definition maps. High definition maps, as I mentioned, is a part of the infrastructure to support AV deployment. And some of the consultants, they indicated that HD maps are seen as a must for the road agencies and OEMs. There are various definitions of high definition maps used by different industries, and also there are different standards. So it is important to harmonize these standards around high definition maps. We also know that maintaining and developing high definition maps is very ongoing, expensive exercise, and the government needs a good monetizing business case for developing the high definition maps. However, it is believed that it's an asset. So now we look at the physical roads as an asset, but then as we move towards that future that automated vehicles will dominate the transport system, then we might not actually need traffic signals or even traffic signs or line markings, as long as we have very well established and very good high definition maps, right? So it could be considered as actually as an asset that some believe that road agencies now should invest in that. So if high definition map is provided by road agencies in a centralized depository with an internationally harmonized approach, then the cost for the end user could be lower. And that's something that some OEMs believe that, like for instance, Toyota or the other ones, they believe that if we have already high definition maps for at least our metro areas, then the uptake of automated driving technologies in Australia maybe even earlier than the other countries, or we may not have that time lag, whereas the other way around. So like, for instance, in Japan, we know that the road agency now is collecting and providing the high definition maps to all OEMs, but it's going to be very challenging for the Australia because of the network size. And it is likely that cameras and radars will produce maps of infrastructure while traveling. So crowdsourcing could be one of the options. And even, in fact, actually, there are some groups that they're developing open source maps, and there will be a voluntary contribution by crowds, we believe. These efforts may provide options for the state road agencies to utilize. However, relying only on this in some of the areas with lower traffic volume would be very dangerous. If you think about any changes in the infrastructure, then if there's not enough penetration of automated vehicles, updating the high definition maps, then that's something that perhaps road agencies again should invest in developing those. And high definition maps, are expected to be available in 10 years, but Australia would also lag in adopting the maps, as I mentioned, because of vast areas and distances. And perhaps it would be just available for some key routes for a few years ahead. And the last, one of the other items is scalability, which is important, and the commercial justification for providing this just doesn't still exist. And also role of connectivity. So for reliance on HD maps and not physical infrastructure, then an accuracy of at least 1 or 2 centimeters for vehicle positioning is required, and the role of connectivity then become really highlighted, where roadside units, either like virtual or on-site, definitely would be required. So that's my last slide, and about vehicle to X connectivity, which could be V2I or V2X, vehicle to infrastructure or vehicle to vehicle. So as I mentioned, traffic signs are expected to be equipped with digital infrastructure to vehicle communication. This would resolve the obscuration of traffic signs that we've seen has been challenging for CAF trials, and also lack of visibility in bad weather like heavy rain. Communication then would be particularly beneficial where there are 2 traffic signs very close to each other, for instance, in parallel roads that are very confusing to machine vision. And providing connectivity or at least cellular availability in tunnels, also particularly long tunnels, for instance, the ones that we have in Sydney West Connects in New South Wales, which actually has also a signal, is going to be critical. V2V communication, vehicle to vehicle communication, also become very critical for emergency and regulatory vehicles, and vulnerable road users, because again, when we just rely on vehicles, then in terms of providing the safety of the vulnerable road users, bicycles and pedestrians, V2X connectivity would be highly critical. In terms of the work zone signs, also we've seen some trials in the United States that the work zone signage has been equipped with the sensors, providing a kind of a warning to all of the approaching vehicles that the infrastructure or the road has been changed, or there is a work zone here. So real-time warning of abrupt transition in the highways, as I mentioned, again, is one of the areas that V2X connectivity can help, and also real-time warning of emergency vehicles passing and capacity of motorway, safe stopping areas and also urban pickup and drop-off zones, because we can't just rely on vehicles to travel around and find a parking themselves. So that's where V2X connectivity would be critical. And yeah, so with that, then I'm done. So as I mentioned, it's just the partial findings of our project that I'm happy that I shared it with you. Just please search for the final report once it's publicly available. And I'm happy to answer any question if there's any. Okay, so we have one question from Ross. Real-time crowdsourced data provision provided by firms like Mobileye remove the need for specific ARRB road agency data collection vehicles in the medium time period. Yeah, Ross, so now we know that Mobileye, particularly the Unit 8, that it uploads all of the data on cloud. I'm not sure if it would be accessible for the state road agencies or for some research organizations like ARRB, but definitely that's something that we think would be the future, just like Google Review, right? And as I mentioned, developing high definition maps and all of those data collection vehicles, it would be very costly, and it would be very ongoing cost for the road agencies, whereas crowdsourcing would be a solution very easy to be shared with everyone, with all of the OEMs and so on. But I think the critical stage here would be developing a standard around harmonizing those collected data. So now we have Mobileye that they may collect the data in a certain format, but it might not be consistent with the other companies. And could I answer your question? You can unmute yourself if you like.
Yeah, look, yeah, perfect. Thanks very much. I was just more collecting the sort of plethora of data that's going to be available over the time. Road condition and those sorts of issues, I guess, become dynamic and probably easier to do than the sort of standard forms that we've been working in the past. So part of that disruption I was thinking about. But yep, that's great. Thanks.
Yeah, that's certainly true, Ross. Yes. Yeah, I think that would be the future, to be honest. Crowdsourcing of the data. Yeah. Okay, so if there's no more question, then I can hand it over to David for the next presentation. David? Can you share your screen?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm back.
Thank you. Yes, we can see your screen.
That's all shared nicely, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So this session, I'm just going to talk. Oh, sorry, too quick. Talk about two projects or two things that we're looking into. One is the cloud connected road systems, and then the other one is the signal priority using connected technologies project that we have done recently. So the first one's cloud connected road system. So just a bit of background. Road users, I guess, have always been connected to the road environment in one form or another. So this connectivity influences decision making while they use the road network. And so there's a bit of evidence around how that evolution of the connected road users has evolved over time. So way back in the beginning, at the base level, the road users observed the signage and the line marking, so they're connected that way. And then as part of evolution 1, traffic reports were broadcasted by radio to road users, so they got that information. which would then influence their decision making. Then a bit of a second evolution is entail dynamic information that is visually displayed on the roadside to road users en route. And then the third evolution was had some pre-journey tailored information about predicted travel times and issues applicable to the specific journey, and access was provided to the road users. Then on the fourth evolution, you had some route tailored information about the journey, and that was provided and able to be accessed by the road users while during their journey, so that could influence their decision making while undertaking their journey. And then for evolution 5, the connected road users, or connected road vehicles and connected roads associated entities were developed, enabling the exchange of data and information through cloud connectivity. So that's a bit of a conceptual idea around how the evolution of connected road users has evolved. And so from Australia's perspective, I believe we're currently around at evolution 5, having passed through evolutions 1 and 4, and then potentially on the cusp of future evolutions. And so things like mobility as a service, or MaaS, is an early example of an application of evolution 5. And then as connectivity between road users and the road environment evolves, the complexity of this data exchange and how road agencies support cloud-connected road users will also evolve. So a bit of background there. And then so I guess a cloud-connected road user is one that has access to a cellular connected device that can exchange data in a bilateral manner. So the road user could be a vehicle equipped with a SIM card to enable to have cellular connectivity and is connected to the cloud. It can also be a person who is using the road and has access to a cellular equipped device, which enables it to have connectivity and is connected to that cloud. So in that sense, a cloud connected road user can potentially be all road users, so ranging from drivers and passengers in vehicles, the vehicle itself, public transport user, freight transporter, cyclists, pedestrians, etc. It can be everyone. So the cloud, I guess, connected or mobility data exchange requires, I guess, the exchange of data between the various road users and stakeholders and service providers associated with the use of the road network. So this figure kind of shows a cloud-connected exchange for a road system, and involves the exchange of data between the road agencies, the vehicle equipment manufacturers, or the OEMs, and other data providers, and then the road users. And then below that, you have, I guess, a series of providers which are also able to provide services to these 3 entity types via the data exchange. So for it all to work, as we can kind of see on the right-hand side of the slide, is that it essentially requires data, information, and delivery. So the data comprises of the raw data that may be exchanged within the cloud. And so that data can be converted to information by entities and is used by the end road or end users within the cloud. The raw data may be obtained and converted to information before being delivered. So it can do that. Or alternatively, the raw data may be delivered before it is converted to the information. So kind of showing, I guess, 2 alternative steps. Either the data goes to delivery, or data goes to information and goes to delivery. Actually, there should be a second arrow between information and delivery there. So apologies about that. And then information, or the raw data, is delivered to the users within the cloud. So, and then the users of the data and information may be the end road users, road agencies, OEMs, service providers, and other stakeholders. So it's all interchangeable and bilateral exchange between data and information between the various entities in the cloud. So I guess, why is this important? I guess we've got a few kind of things coming on that kind of really influence all this, and is kind of providing a bit of a need to look into it. So first is that the emerging 5G infrastructure is providing an enabler for connectivity between the various entities that make up the cloud. The cloud connectivity is a growing area with more vehicles expected to become connected in the future. Not only are more vehicles becoming available with the cloud connectivity, there is a growing consumer acceptance of cloud connectivity in the cloud, and with this, there are a growing number of service providers providing services to the cloud. It's also important for the various stakeholders and entities associated with the road system to support the cloud-connected road users. And so this is because it will enable road users to make informed decisions on their journeys and enable stakeholders such as road agencies and operators to manage and maintain their road infrastructure more effectively. So this is from both a safety and a transport efficiencies perspective. And it's also applicable to both pre and during journey decision making. And then so by setting up a mobility data exchange, it allows mobility data to be exchanged, and it allows that data that is collected once for a specific purpose to also be used many times by the various users and entities within the cloud where that data is able to be shared. So there's obviously privacy and security issues with some data, but where those issues don't exist and it's able to be shared, it does enable data to be collected once and used many times. And so this can provide value or added value to the data, and then also provide justifications for data collection in the first place. There's probably other reasons, but they're, I guess, some of the key ones. So what's this one about? So yeah, the cloud connected ecosystem for road users is complex. So some parts of the cloud connected ecosystem are well established while others are emerging. So there are various models being developed by the various entities involved in the cloud connected ecosystem for road users. And so these models are largely being developed by industry and largely based on commercial interest at the moment. And so entities involved in the road system need to make a decision on whether they support cloud connectivity and how, and then governments and road agencies recognising that they have a role and are getting involved in the cloud connected ecosystem for road users. So to take advantage of cloud connectivity, there's a need to enable vehicles and other technologies that are used on the road network and which are made for a global market to function in jurisdictions where road users travel between. There's a need to have that done in a harmonised manner. So this will require the need to follow major international developments such as what's going on in Europe and the US, and to apply a harmonised approach across neighbouring jurisdictions. So we're thinking kind of in the Australian context there. And so this is rather than kind of developing a unique approach applicable to a small sub-market. But overall, I guess the ecosystem is still in its infancy relative to the potential full life cycle. So there's a need, I guess, to be nimble and adaptive when implementing any cloud connectivity for the road system, and to be prepared to pivot from the path that you decided to take, and really we'll talk about that a bit more in the next slide. So in terms of some of the implications for, I guess, jurisdictions such as the states and territories of Australia, is that there is a need to recognise that the cloud-connected ecosystem for road users is not mature. It's still in its infancy and of its full life cycle, as mentioned just in the last slide. The Australian jurisdictions need to learn through doing. There's also a need to take a harmonised approach, given that road users travel between jurisdictions and vehicles and road user technologies are used across jurisdictions seamlessly. So there's a need to apply a harmonised approach, but then also start on that journey with small steps and learn through doing. So in that sense, there's a need to also leverage off international developments and experience and share their and developments and experience, and then share that share the local experience and with international parties as well, so contribute to the international development in this space. And then ultimately, there is a need to prepare the path to take, but be prepared to deviate if required, given the evolving nature of the cloud-connected ecosystem for road users. So, so there are some opportunities we see that for jurisdictions such as Australia to start setting up a mobility data exchange like they've done in other countries. And ARRB, would be happy to work with industry to set up one in Australia and to start learning through doing, so that can be set up in so that we can set something up to take advantage of that cloud-connected road system, and then that will enable road users, road managers, vehicle OEMs, and other stakeholders to start exploiting the benefits that a cloud-connected road system can provide. So that's essentially my first presentation. Maybe I'll go on to the next one because we are running a bit out of time. So the next one is signal priority using connected technology. So I guess this is a bit of an example of how we can use cloud connected system to deliver something like signal priority. So in 2020, ARRB, in collaboration with others, completed an investigation into tram signal priority using connected technologies. And so it was a project undertaken as part of the Victorian Government's Transport Technology Industry Grant Program. And so one objective of this was to improve the integration between public transport, vehicles and road infrastructure using technologies that interface with the roadside or traffic management system. The purpose being to improve the efficiency and reliability of public transport services. So there is a summary report available on our ARRB website, and I've just got the link there on that slide. So the project was a collaborative effort between VicRoads, so now the Victorian Department of Transport. So they funded and provided SCATS, Traffic Signal Services, ARRB, us. We were a project manager and a report writer. Also had La Trobe University, so they provided technical services and developed the La Trobe bespoke solution, which we'll talk a little bit later. And then Yarra Trams provided and managed and operated the tram. So yeah, they were the key project partners, and we thank them for their involvement. There were also some other projects involved, like Public Transport Victoria at the time. They were interested in the project outcomes and approved the free running stage of the trial. Tyco, we rectified the signal sites and installed roadside units, and then also Advantech Design set up and provided Transnet for trialling. So yeah, we thank them. So the purpose of the trial was to investigate the potential for intelligent communication-based solutions to deliver tram signal priority request to SCATS for processing. So that's because there are many issues associated with the existing physical detector-based system. And some of them are on the slides at the moment, so I'll quickly run through some of them. So essentially 10% of tram detector loops do not function at any point in time. The existing system can only implement unconditional priority, can only initiate a priority request when the tram is detected at the fixed point. There's a need to install and maintain a physical detector. Priority can get stuck in some circumstances. It can be costly to reinstate faulty overhead detector feeders used for the advanced detectors, and there's limited ability to synchronise tram movements with traffic signal management. So through exploring the use of communication technology to deliver the tram signal priority, the trial is aiming to see whether tram signal priority could be done in a smarter and more efficient manner compared to the current physical detector-based system. And so we looked at 12 technologies, and we end up selecting 2, so Transnet and then cooperative ITS or SITS with 5.9 dedicated short-range communications. So yeah, the Transnet technology was developed by Advantech Design and monitors the transposition based on global navigation satellite systems, or GNSS technology, and it requests SCAT's priority actions to be undertaken as determined by the signal operator, and utilises cellular communications as the means of communication. So that's considered top-down solution. And then we have the sits with 5.9 DSRC technology, which was a bespoke solution developed by La Trobe University, and it monitors the transposition based on GNSS technology, and it obtains local inputs with respect to the SCAT's signal phasing and tram door status, and can issue and cancel based on the tram door status SIT's priority request. And so it utilised the local DSRC communications as its means of communicating, and so therefore was more of a bottom-up solution. So we did the trial along a segment of Tram Route 75. Some of you might not be familiar unless you're local, so that's shown on this slide here. And so the Transnet technology was operated at 6 signalised intersections, and then the cooperative ITS with 5.9 DSRC was operated at 3 sites within the segment. It was really, I guess, a proof of concept project. So we're proof of concept of whether the technologies could be used to deliver tram signal priority based on tram travel timetable adherence, and then issuing or requesting priority and having that priority action based regardless of the tram timetable, to see whether it could actually deliver faster tram travel times. And so the project explored whether communication-based technologies could be interfaced with the tram and the signal infrastructure, and explore this in a real world as opposed to laboratory environments. So it's pretty critical. So that included real and operating trams, and then real and operating existing signal infrastructure, existing pits, conduit poles, and signal cabinets. So it was really kind of going out, getting the hands dirty to see if this technology could actually be implemented and work in a real world scenario. But it wasn't intended to be a business case. So it was really just a proof of concept to see whether this could work. And it really, as a result, it did provide some really good findings and lessons with respect to delivering signal priority, not only for trams, but then those lessons could then be applied to other priority vehicles. So some of the, I guess, the key findings with respect to this is that the onboard unit that we use can communicate to Transnet, and then also cooperative ITS with 5.9 DSRC roadside unit. So we used one onboard unit on the tram to communicate to both of those solutions. And then both technologies have the potential to deliver signal priority in a smart and more efficient manner. And this is compared to the physical detector-based system. So Transnet enabled more SCATS actions. So SCATS is the signal operating system to be undertaken under more conditions. And then the sits with 5.9 DSR solution enabled priority requests to be cancelled based on the context of the tram, so whether the door was open. The technologies trialled enabled flexibility in terms of enabling conditional priority to be delivered, so when it's needed and when the priority was able to be utilised. And so this provides flexibility on how priority can be applied, including greater priority to be assigned for specific trams. So conditional priority then enables options to deliver greater priority when required. So this offers increased potential for the tram to adhere to the schedule. And so the technologies could also be set up to enable priority to be delivered regardless of adherence to the schedule as well. And then priority settings were conservative in terms of how much priority was given to the tram. And so further testing could be undertaken with higher priority settings. More aggressive priority settings would then lead to less delays of the traffic signals for the tram. And then by combining conditional priority enables aggressive priority to be applied for those trams that need it. Another key lesson was that it was hard to simulate the stop line detector, so that pinpoint accuracy. And so as such, physical stop line detectors may still be required for optimum operation. And then the sits with 5.9 DSRC as trialled required a roadside unit to be installed. And so this requires site rectification works to be undertaken, plus the installation of the roadside unit. So for some sites, this can be costly. And then using other low latency communications instead of 5.9 DSRC as the communication medium could be explored to see if it removes the need for the roadside unit. And then the sits with 5.9 DSRC cancel request feature based on the door open input was noted to be a useful feature. So overall, we found that there was benefits in, I guess, all the technologies, so even the physical, the transnet, and then the sits with 5.9. And so something like a hybrid solution could be explored. So essentially, there was various learnings derived through undertaking this project. And so these learnings could be applied to other priority vehicles. And the project learnings really included communication technologies that enable more diverse, more flexible signal priority delivery. The project demonstrated how to interface technology with SCATS, the tram and its infrastructure to deliver the signal priority. And then the project also identified the key elements required to deliver active signal priority effectively. And so they include the need for contextual awareness, so the location and whether priority is needed for the tram, the vehicle state monitoring, so the status of the vehicle and if it can utilise priority. So that was particularly important with the tram because the tram approaches the signal lights and then may often have to stop to let passengers on and off. So it's around actually acknowledging whether, having that ability to know whether the tram is in a position to utilise the priority. The technology integration with the existing traffic signal systems, and then a user interface to allow signal operators to review and alter the priority settings easily. So the project proved that the physical and logical architecture, so i.e. the hardware and the software, can deliver conditional signal priority using communication-based technologies. However, the policy, which we consider the conceptual architecture, is needed to deliver the traffic signal priority and to influence how much priority is granted and under what conditions. And so overall, the project found that the technologies can be developed that integrate information technology with operational technology, so IT-OT convergence. And so this was demonstrated at 3 levels. So the physical detector, or level 1 being the physical detector, so that integrates the physical detection with SCATS. And then level 2 was the virtual detection and the integration of the virtual detection with SCATS. And then level 3 was the virtual detection and integration of the virtual detection with SCATS and ongoing real-time evaluation of local factors, such as having the door open. So the more IT-OT convergence that occurs, the greater the likelihood that it should lead to an ability to implement a wide range of priority scenarios that is more reflective of the policy for priority management. So this could lead to more aggressive priority for the trams that need it most, and less priority for those trams that don't, subject to the policy around how the priority is actually delivered. So whether it's based on schedule, adherence to schedule, or the tram travel time. So I guess through this experience, various key future investigations are identified, and ARRB is really well placed, I think, to assist road operators and others with respect to this. So some of those future investigations could be use the learnings through this trial to investigate and develop future hybrid solutions using various detection methods, such as the physical detector, for its ability to provide accurate point detection, technologies such as Transnet, for their ability to provide advanced detection and conditional traffic priority management, and then the sits with 5.9 DSRC interface for its ability to cancel requests based on some local contextual conditions, such as having the tram door being open. And so developing that hybrid solution should then enhance the information technology with operational technology convergence. The next one was around further exploring how communication technologies can provide enhanced traffic signal priority requests and actions by providing enhanced contextual awareness, and apply this to other priority vehicles. And then last but not least was the need to, I guess, determine the policy associated with the use of communication-based signal priority technologies, and then the policy would then determine the, I guess, the level of priority that can be applied to that vehicle, given that you know a lot more about the vehicle and when it can take advantage of the priority and the level of priority that is needed. Yeah, and that's essentially my presentation for the day. So I think we're actually almost out of time, but happy to take a few questions.
Thanks, David. Are there any questions? You can put it in the chat line or just unmute yourself. Elli's had to leave. She sends her apologies. It's in the chat line. There's another session that's starting in another room, and she's given us the link. So Mark Hickman is going to talk about some interesting developments in transit, which I think started about a few minutes ago. So just any last calls for questions for David? Well, if not, just thank you everyone for this session, Track 4E. And I hope you have a good rest of the day and a good weekend. Thank you and goodbye.
Thanks, Charles. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.